The Simpsons has been on the air since 1989, 36 years, nearly 800 episodes. And across all of that time, buried inside the jokes, folded into the background gags, slipped beneath the couch scenes and the donut references and the chalkboard punishments, the show is trying to tell you something. Something real. Something that, if you heard it in a news broadcast or a documentary or a speech, would have made you sit up straight and pay attention. But because it came wrapped in yellow skin and delivered by a man who once got his head stuck in a bucket, the audience laughed, changed the channel, and forgot about it by morning. That is what this video is about. Not the fan theories, not the predictions, not the Easter eggs or the continuity errors or the debates about when the show got bad. This is about the moments when The Simpsons walked right up to the edge of the stage, looked directly into the camera, and said something devastating about the world we actually live in. And the audience, every single time, laughed and moved on. Settle in. Get comfortable. Because for the next several hours, we are going through Springfield, one truth at a time. Section 1. The nuclear plant knew first. There is a building at the edge of Springfield that has been sitting there since the very first episode of the show. You know it. The cooling towers. The ominous silhouette against a gray sky. The two massive concrete structures that Homer Simpson drives past every morning on his way to work, spilling a glowing green rod out of his pocket before the credits even finish rolling. That building is the Springfield nuclear power plant, and for 36 years, the audience has treated it as scenery. It is not scenery. The Springfield nuclear power plant is, within the fictional universe of the show, one of the most dangerous industrial facilities ever depicted in the history of American television. And the show did not try to hide this. It did not bury the details in subtext or leave them to interpretation. It put them front and center, in the dialogue, in the visuals, in the mouths of characters who existed specifically to sound alarm bells that the audience was never meant to ignore. The audience ignored them anyway. Let us go back to the beginning, to the specific episode where the show first decided to tell you the truth about what that building really was. Season 2, Episode 1. Bart Gets an F is not the episode we are looking for, but the spirit of Season 2 is important to understand, because Season 2 is when The Simpsons stopped being a novelty and became a phenomenon. The show had an audience now, a real one, tens of millions of people tuning in every week. And the writers who were by this point fully settled into what the show could do began using that audience for something. They began testing how much the audience would accept. In the Season 2 episode, 2 Cars in Every Garage and 3 Eyes on Every Fish, the show gives us Blinky. Blinky is a fish with 3 eyes. He is caught in a river directly downstream from the Springfield nuclear power plant by Bart Simpson, who is fishing with his father on one of those rare Sunday afternoons when Homer is present and pleasant and doing something resembling normal family life. Bart pulls Blinky out of the water and holds him up. And the show, right there, in a moment so straightforward it almost does not register as important, tells you exactly what has been happening to the ecosystem surrounding that plant. A 3-eyed fish. Not a sick fish, not an injured fish. A fish with an extra eye, a fish whose biology has been fundamentally altered by whatever is leaking from the facility upstream. And this is not a background detail. This is the central plot point of the entire episode. A journalist photographs the fish. It becomes national news. A gubernatorial candidate named Marty Monroe uses Blinky as the centerpiece of his campaign against Burns, holding the fish up as evidence that the plant is poisoning the environment around it. The episode gives you a politician saying, in plain language, that a billionaire industrialist is contaminating the water supply of an entire town and that the fish the children are swimming with have been mutated as a result. And the show's resolution, the punchline that closes the episode, is that Burns eats the fish on live television and the public accepts this as proof of safety, and the politician loses the election. The audience laughed. They were supposed to. That is what made it so precise. Because what the show had just depicted, with perfect satirical accuracy, is the mechanism by which environmental catastrophe gets buried in public life. A damning piece of evidence is presented. A powerful man performs a theatrical act of dismissal. The public, reassured by the performance, moves on. Nobody tests the water. Nobody follows up on the fish. Nobody asks the question that the episode itself is screaming at you to ask, which is, if the fish have 3 eyes, What is happening to the people drinking from that same river? The show asked this question. It asked it inside the story, through the plot, through the journalism and the campaign and the television debate. And then it answered the question with a laugh and a dissolve to the next scene, because that is what satire does. It tells you the truth and then gives you permission to laugh instead of sitting with the discomfort, and the audience took the permission. Every time. Now move forward to the episode that is perhaps the most direct statement the show has ever made about the plant. Not the most famous, not the most quoted, but the most nakedly honest. The episode is called Homer's Odyssey. It is the third episode of the first season. Homer Simpson, having caused a near-catastrophic incident at the plant by falling asleep at his console and allowing a cart carrying radioactive material to collide with a nuclear core, is fired. He becomes depressed. He wanders the town. He almost kills himself. And then, in a moment that the show plays as personal revelation but is actually something much larger, Homer discovers a safety hazard on a road near his house. A blind curve where cars cannot see pedestrians. He makes a sign, he campaigns, he gets the hazard fixed, and then he looks around Springfield and realizes there are safety hazards everywhere. In the street, in the park, on the playground. The entire town, he comes to understand, is full of dangers that nobody has bothered to address. And his solution, the thing that gives Homer Simpson purpose and pulls him back from the edge, is to become a safety inspector at the nuclear power plant. The show plays this as a triumph. Homer has found his calling. He has a job. The family is saved. The audience exhales with relief and laughs at the absurdity of it. But what the show has just told you, in the structure of that plot alone, is something genuinely disturbing. The least qualified person to be a safety inspector at any facility in the country, a man who was just fired from the same plant for falling asleep during a radioactive materials transfer, a man who the show's own creator has stated possesses an IQ of approximately 55, has been placed in charge of safety at a nuclear facility that provides power to an entire town. And the town is fine with this. Burns is fine with this. Actually, Burns is better than fine with it. This is something the show returns to repeatedly, in ways that the audience consistently processes as jokes about Homer's incompetence, when what is actually being described is an arrangement of deliberate, calculated, institutional negligence. In a later season, German investors briefly purchase the power plant. The first thing they do after taking ownership is fire Homer Simpson. The second thing they do is send engineers to assess what it would actually cost to bring the facility up to code, to fix the violations, to make the plant safe. The estimate nearly bankrupts them. They sell the plant back to Burns almost immediately. Burns, in return, rehires Homer on his first day back in charge. Now, sit with what that sequence of events actually describes. New ownership with fresh eyes comes in, sees the facility, does a cost assessment of what it would take to make it legal and safe, and determines that the cost is so staggering that they cannot bear it. So they sell. And the original owner, who has lived with that cost assessment for years and chosen not to spend the money, returns to power and immediately restores the incompetent safety inspector to his position. The show is telling you that Homer's continued employment is not an accident or an oversight or a quirk of Burns's eccentricity. It is a system. A safety inspector who actually inspected things would find the violations. Finding the violations would require fixing them. Fixing them would cost $56 million, according to the numbers the show gives us, or enough to make German investors abandon a profitable acquisition. And Burns has decided, very specifically, that this cost is not worth paying. So instead, he pays Homer Simpson a modest salary to sit in a chair in Sector 7G and not notice anything. The show tells you this. It shows you the sequence. It makes the logic explicit. And the audience processes it as another Homer is stupid joke, which it is, but that is only the surface of what the show is doing. Beneath the surface, The Simpsons is describing a real and recurring phenomenon in industrial history. The deliberate employment of people who will not see what they are supposed to be seeing. The strategic placement of willful ignorance at the point where observation would be most dangerous. The show knew about this. The writers knew about it. Because it had already happened in the real world, repeatedly, in industries from mining to pharmaceuticals to financial services, by the time The Simpsons first aired. And the plant's violations, when the show finally lists them for us in a season 2 episode, are not presented as exaggerations. They are presented as facts within the show's universe, delivered in a clinical, matter-of-fact tone that makes them funnier through sheer accumulation. 342 safety violations. Radioactive waste dumped directly into bodies of water. Radioactive waste left on children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. Cooling towers with cracks sealed using chewing gum. Rats in the facility that glow in the dark. And then, the one that the show mentions and immediately moves past, as if it is simply another item on a list that has already become absurd. Human skeletons in the basement. Human skeletons. In the basement of a functioning nuclear power plant. The show never returns to this. It is not a plot point. Nobody investigates. Nobody identifies the remains. Nobody asks how human beings ended up dead inside the facility and why their bones are still there. The safety inspector who is technically responsible for the building's safety report does not appear to have filed a report on the skeletons. The police, whose job it is to investigate unexplained human remains, are apparently also unconcerned. The audience laughed at the list and moved on. But here is what the show was actually doing with that detail. It was establishing, without saying it directly, that people had already died inside this plant, that the negligence was not theoretical or future tense, that the consequences of running a facility with 342 violations and a plutonium paperweight and a chewing gum-patched cooling tower had already materialized in a form that was literal and irreversible, and had been quietly covered up. The skeletons are not a joke. They are a confession. And the confession is sitting right there in the building where Homer goes to work every morning, past the cooling towers, through the security checkpoint, down to Sector 7G, where he sits at his console and sometimes falls asleep and sometimes eats donuts, and the plant keeps running, and the water keeps getting whatever the plant puts into it, and nobody says a word. Now consider what the show does in the Simpsons movie, which arrived in 2007 and is by any measure the most dramatically escalated version of the Springfield as contamination zone story. The Environmental Protection Agency, operating within the show's universe as a real federal agency with actual regulatory authority, determines that Springfield's environmental contamination has reached a point so severe that the only viable response is physical containment. They dome the town, a massive glass dome, lowered from the sky, sealing Springfield from the rest of the country. The framing of this moment in the film is played for spectacle and absurdity. It is a blockbuster movie moment. The audience in the theater laughed and gasped and pointed at the screen. But what this scene actually depicts is the United States federal government classifying an entire American town as an environmental hazard zone so dangerous that its pollution cannot be allowed to reach neighboring communities. Springfield is not just polluted. Springfield is quarantined. And the people inside the dome when it goes up, the ones who have been drinking the water and breathing the air and living in the shadow of those cooling towers for decades, are sealed inside with the contamination. The show does not dwell on this. The film keeps moving. There are jokes. Homer makes mistakes. The family escapes and comes back and saves the day. The dome is eventually removed. By the time the credits roll, everything is more or less fine. But the dome happened? Within the show's own logic, it happened. The federal government of the United States, in the world where Homer Simpson lives, determined that his town was toxic enough to require physical containment. And the next season of the television show proceeded as normal. Homer went back to work at the plant. Burns went back to his office. The three-eyed fish was still in the river. And the audience tuned in every week, comfortable with all of it, because the show had spent 17 years training them to find it normal. This is what the show was telling you about the real world, that the mechanism for managing environmental catastrophe in a society where one billionaire owns the contaminating facility is not cleanup or accountability or legal remedy. It is normalization. It is the slow, patient process of making the contamination feel like a background detail, like scenery, like something that has always been there and has never really hurt anyone. Until the point where you look at a three-eyed fish and your first instinct is not alarm but familiarity. The plant knew. The plant always knew. The plant was built knowing what it would do and what it would cost and who would pay. And Homer drove past the cooling towers every morning, spilling his glowing green rod, and the audience laughed. That is what The Simpsons was telling you. Before we move on, Let us sit with one more thing about that plant, about what it represents in the show's larger argument. The Springfield nuclear power plant is not just a setting. It is the show's most sustained metaphor for what America decided to do with the 20th century. The 20th century was the century of industrialization's full flowering, of systems built at enormous scale, of complexity purchased at enormous cost, of the decision, made collectively and often silently, to accept certain kinds of harm in exchange for certain kinds of comfort. The plant produces electricity. The plant also produces blinky and contaminated groundwater and Homer Simpson's daily proximity to forces that could, if something went wrong in exactly the right way, produce a disaster of significant proportions. And the trade-off was decided long before Homer got there, long before any of the current workers showed up for their shift. The plant existed before they did. The arrangement existed before they did. And arriving into an existing arrangement is not the same as choosing it, even if, over time, you learn to call it your choice. This is the architecture of the show's opening credits, which the audience has watched thousands of times and which the show itself designed with unusual care. The credits show Homer at work, Homer driving, Homer arriving home. They show Springfield in a kind of panoramic sweep that passes the plant, the school, the church, the family on the couch. And they collapse every single time into the family watching television, watching themselves, in the recursive loop that the show uses as its signature. The family is inside the thing. They are part of the arrangement. They have been there long enough that the arrangement is indistinguishable from home. The plant is part of home. The river is part of home. The tire fire at the edge of town is part of home. And home, as the show has always known, is the thing you do not question because questioning it would mean questioning everything. The Simpsons has been on the air long enough that multiple generations of viewers have grown up with it as a constant. Children who watched it when it premiered are now in their 40s and 50s. Their children have watched it. In some cases, their children's children have watched it. This creates a relationship with the show that is not quite like any other relationship a viewer has with any other piece of media. The Simpsons is not just a show that you watched. It is a show that was present during your life. That was on in the background of your childhood, or your adolescence, or the decade when you were figuring out what you were. That was the thing on the television when you were sick, or home from school, or eating alone, or staying up too late on a Sunday night. The show became part of the furniture of your interior life, not always consciously, not always in a way you would describe as influence. But it was there, and it kept being there. And over time, the accumulated presence of it shaped something in how you understood the world it was depicting, which is the world you live in. Springfield is not a different world. It is a simplified and stylized and animated version of the same world. The same economy, the same government, the same media, the same nuclear plant at the edge of every town where the people work and the fish have changed and nobody quite asks why. You live in that world. The show has been telling you about it since before you were old enough to understand what it was telling you. You understand now. Hey, before we keep going, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I want to know who's still awake for this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a genuinely good moment to do that. There is a lot more of Springfield left to get through. There is something else worth dwelling on before we move away from the plant entirely. The workers. Not Homer specifically, though Homer is the one we follow, but the broader population of people who clock in at that facility every day. The people in the background of every plant scene, milling around in their hard hats, holding clipboards, wandering past pipes that are leaking colors that pipes should not leak. These are the people the show is really talking about when it builds the nuclear plant as a setting, not the absurdity of the building itself. The reality of what it means to spend your working life inside a place like that. And the show understood something about those workers that most workplace comedies do not bother to acknowledge. They knew. On some level, they all knew. They knew the safety protocols were a performance. They knew the inspections were theater. They knew the fish in the river downstream had changed in ways that fish should not change. And they came to work anyway, because the alternative was not coming to work, and not coming to work was not something they could afford. This is a particular kind of knowing that The Simpsons captured with uncomfortable precision, the kind where you hold two contradictory truths in your head simultaneously and learn to live between them. The job is dangerous. The job is also the job. You are aware of the first fact and you proceed because of the second one. And over time, the awareness of the first fact dims, not because it becomes less true, but because you need it to dim in order to function. Homer Simpson is the patron saint of that dimming. He is not an oblivious man in the way that cartoon characters are sometimes written as oblivious. He is a man who has chosen, with remarkable consistency, to look away, to prioritize the immediate comfort over the distant alarm, to eat the donut, take the nap, avoid the memo. And the show presents this not as stupidity, which is how the audience reads it, but as a survival mechanism that has become indistinguishable from the man himself. There is an episode in Season 7 called King Size Homer, where Homer deliberately gains weight in order to qualify as disabled and work from home. The scheme is played for laughs. Homer watching exercise shows while eating, the exaggerated waddle, the motorized cart, but the engine of the plot is the fact that Homer finds his workplace so unbearable that he is willing to physically damage himself in order to avoid being present in it. He does not ask for better conditions. He does not organize with his coworkers. He does not file a complaint. He eats himself into a medical category that allows him to leave. The audience found this hilarious in 1995. By the mid-2010s, it reads like a documentary about every person who has ever found a workaround instead of a solution, because solutions require a kind of institutional access and collective power that most workers simply do not have. But the nuclear plant episodes do something even more specific than that. They return, again and again, to the question of documentation, to the question of what happens when the dangerous thing is not just suspected but proven, written down, verified, published. And the answer the show gives, with remarkable consistency, is that documentation changes very little. In 2 cars in every garage and 3 eyes on every fish, the episode that gives us Blinky, a journalist named Dave Shutton covers the story of the mutated fish. The story runs in the paper. Mr. Burns is investigated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There is a hearing. There is testimony. And Mr. Burns, faced with potential fines and shutdown orders, does not clean up his act. He runs for governor. He converts the liability into a campaign platform. He turns Blinky from evidence of harm into a symbol of his own persecution by out-of-touch regulators. He loses the election, but he keeps the plant. The show understood that the goal of powerful interests is not to avoid accountability. It is to survive accountability, to outlast the news cycle, to convert the scandal into a narrative that serves them, to find the procedural off-ramp that lets them keep operating even after the documentation is complete. And when you watch that episode today, knowing what you know about how regulatory proceedings actually unfold in the real world, the comedy has a different texture. The jokes are still there, but underneath them is something that keeps a person awake at night if they let it. What the nuclear plant scenes ultimately give us is a portrait of complicity as infrastructure. The workers need their jobs. The town needs the tax revenue. The politicians need the campaign donations. The regulators need the industry contacts for when they eventually move through the revolving door. And so, the plant keeps running, and the river keeps changing colors, and Blinky keeps swimming in it, and every few years an episode will remind you that this is still happening, and then the episode ends, and something else is on, and life continues. Homer puts on his hard hat, gets in the car, drives past the cooling towers. Another day, Section 2, MR, Burns and the Wealth That Buys Silence. There is a type of character that appears in American storytelling with remarkable consistency. The robber baron, the corrupt industrialist, the old money villain with his fingers in every institution that is supposed to protect the people from exactly the kind of man he is. From Charles Dickens to Frank Capra to The Wire, the figure of the wealthy man who has purchased his immunity from consequences is one of the most durable archetypes in the Western narrative tradition. And in The Simpsons, that figure is Charles Montgomery Burns. Burns has been on the show since the beginning. He is Homer's employer, the owner of the plant, the richest man in Springfield, and, by some readings of the show's continuity, possibly one of the richest men in America. He is ancient, physically frail, mentally sharp, casually cruel, and largely untouchable. He fires people on whims, he buys politicians, he manipulates municipal elections, he literally blocks out the sun. And for 36 years, the audience has loved him. They have quoted his lines and his mannerisms and his way of pressing his fingertips together and saying excellent. He is, by a wide margin, one of the most beloved characters in the history of the show. Burns' merchandise sells? Burns' one-liners appear in top 10 lists. Episodes centered on Burns are among the show's most celebrated. The audience loves Mr. Burns, and this is exactly what the show is telling you about the real world. Let us start with what the show actually establishes about how Burns operates, not as a cartoon villain with theatrical menace, but as a specific and recognizable type of institutional power. Burns does not simply possess money, he deploys it. There is a distinction in the show between Burns having wealth and Burns using wealth. And that distinction is made visible and explicit in ways that the audience consistently misread as jokes about his eccentricity. In the Season 4 episode Money Can't Buy Me Love, Burns becomes obsessed with being loved by the public. He wants ordinary people to like him. He wants the kind of popular affection that he has never been able to buy. The episode is structured as a comedy of a powerful man who discovers the one thing his money cannot purchase. But watch what happens in the background of that story. Burns' attempt to buy affection involves, among other things, giving away money in a department store, sponsoring public events, and attempting grand gestures of public generosity. And every single one of these attempts is received with suspicion, confusion, or indifference by the public. Not because the public dislikes Burns specifically, because the public cannot locate Burns in their understanding of the world. He exists at a level of abstraction from their daily lives that makes him genuinely invisible to them as a person. He is not a neighbor or a colleague or a familiar face. He is a name on a building. He is the company. He is the institution. The show is describing something that is not funny at all. It is describing the way that extreme wealth creates a kind of social invisibility that protects its possessor from the normal mechanisms of social accountability. Burns cannot be disliked the way a person can be disliked because Burns does not appear in the spaces where dislike operates. He is not at the grocery store. He is not at the school play. He is not in the places where reputation is built and destroyed through daily human interaction. He is in the manor. He is in the boardroom. He is in the private elevator, and the private car, and the private clinic. And the people whose lives he affects through his decisions at the plant, and in the town's economy, and in the corridors of municipal government never see him making those decisions. They see only the results of those decisions. They see the three-eyed fish. They see the layoffs. They see the power bills. They see Homer coming home from the plant, smelling of whatever Homer comes home smelling of. But they do not see Burns. And what you cannot see, you cannot hold accountable. The show makes this explicit in an episode that is rarely discussed in this context. In Sideshow Bob's Last Gleaming, the primary plot involves Sideshow Bob and a nuclear weapon, which is exactly as chaotic as it sounds. But buried inside the episode is a moment where Burns appears before a local government committee to discuss the plant's operations, and the committee members, who are supposed to be regulatory authorities with actual oversight power, spend most of the scene trying to figure out whether Burns is alive or some kind of preserved specimen. It is a joke about Burns' age and appearance, but it is also a joke about how regulatory capture works. The people who are supposed to be asking Burns hard questions about his facility are not asking those questions. They are fascinated by him. They are in awe of him. They treat his presence in their committee room as an event rather than a routine oversight function. And Burns, who has navigated dozens of these encounters over his very long life, knows exactly what tone to strike and what words to use and when to be theatrical enough to turn a potential grilling into a performance. The episode does not call this out. It plays it as absurdism, but what it is describing is regulatory capture, the real and documented phenomenon where the agencies responsible for overseeing an industry come to be dominated by the interests of the industry itself, such that the agency's function shifts from protection of the public to protection of the regulated entity. Burns does not need to bribe the committee. He simply needs to outlast them. And he has been outlasting regulatory committees for over a century. Now consider the episode that the show uses to explore Burns' relationship with political power directly. Burns' Verkaufen der Kraftwerk, which is the German investors episode we touched on earlier, is one of the most politically precise episodes in the show's history, and it is discussed almost exclusively in terms of Homer's comedic struggle to keep his job. But the episode is doing something else. When Burns sells the plant to the German investors, the transaction is presented as purely financial. Burns needs cash. He sells. Simple. Except Burns almost immediately regrets the sale, and the episode tracks his psychological deterioration as he adjusts to life without his empire. He plays golf, he eats meals, he attends events, and he is miserable. Not because he misses the money. He still has money. He is miserable because he has no power. And when the German investors find themselves unable to afford the cost of bringing the facility up to code, Burns sees his opportunity and buys the plant back immediately. The price he pays is significantly less than what he sold it for. The episode ends with Burns back in his chair, Homer back at his console, everything restored to its original configuration. But what the episode has just described is a complete cycle of the way that failing industrial infrastructure stays in the hands of its original owner. A dangerous facility is sold. The buyer discovers the true cost of its liabilities. The buyer cannot absorb those liabilities. The original owner, who already knew about those liabilities and had already decided not to address them, buys it back at a discount. The result is that the facility, which has not been made safer, which still has all 342 violations, which still has the glowing rats and the chewing gum patches and the skeletons in the basement, is now worth less money on paper than it was before, and is still producing power and still owned by the man who chose to let it stay dangerous. The public is not safer. The town is not cleaner. Burns is slightly richer than he would have been if he had simply held the asset, because his buyer's failure to absorb the liabilities he already knew about became a discount at the moment of repurchase. The show presents this as a happy ending. Homer has his job back. Burns is back in charge. The status quo is restored. The audience feels relief because the show's central character is employed again and the familiar hierarchy has been reestablished. And the dangerous plant is still dangerous. And nobody cares, because that is the part of the story the show's structure does not have room for. Now let us talk about the most famous Burns episode, the one that made him a cultural icon and cemented his place in television history. Who Shot Mr.? Burns is a two-part episode from seasons 6 and 7 that the show structured as a murder mystery, or in this case, an attempted murder mystery. We have discussed this mystery in the context of whodunit theories. But for the purposes of what the show was telling the audience about wealth and power, the who matters less than the why. Burns, by the time someone shoots him, has done the following things to the town of Springfield in a compressed period of time. He has drilled for oil beneath a school, extracting the oil, destroying the school's budget, and causing structural damage to the building. He has driven a bar out of business through financial manipulation. He has destroyed a retirement home. He has injured a family's dog. And then, the culmination of his campaign of escalation, he has constructed a device to block out the sun over the entire town so that no resident can generate any electricity of their own, and every person in Springfield is entirely dependent on his plant for power. Not figuratively, he actually blocked the sun. And the town's response, after weeks of accumulated grievances, is to gather at a public meeting and yell at him. Nobody in Springfield has the practical power to stop Burns. Not the police, who are shown throughout the show to be not merely incompetent, but actively beholden to the town's power structure in ways that make independent action essentially impossible. Not the courts, which in Springfield operate on a timeline and with a consistency that makes them useless for stopping anything in real time. Not the elected officials, who are bought, incompetent, or both. The only response available to the ordinary people of Springfield when the richest man in their community decides to steal the sun from above their heads is to stand in a room and express their feelings. And then someone shoots him. And the show, when it resolves the mystery, ensures that no meaningful consequence attaches to Burns for what he did. He wakes up from the hospital. He identifies the shooter. He does not appear to face any legal or financial accountability for the oil drilling, the bar closure, the retirement home destruction, or the attempted monopoly on sunlight. The episode ends and the next season proceeds, and Burns is back in his office pressing his fingertips together. The audience processed this as the show returning to its status quo. But the show was telling you something about the real relationship between extreme wealth and legal accountability in a country where the wealthy person's access to legal resources vastly exceeds anything available to the people he has harmed. Burns blocks out the sun. Nobody can stop him. Someone shoots him. He survives. And the next morning, everything is more or less fine. There are so many other Burns episodes that belong in this conversation. The one where he runs for governor and loses only because he cannot eat a three-eyed fish convincingly on live television? The one where he uses his media connections to assassinate an employee's reputation? The one where he hires private investigators to build files on his workforce? The one where he creates a trap door in his office that he uses to drop unwanted visitors into a pit? Each of these episodes was played as comedy. Each of them was also describing something about how wealth operates in relation to the institutions that are supposed to constrain it. The trapdoor episode is, if you look at it with fresh eyes, an episode about a person with so much confidence in his immunity from accountability that he has installed a literal physical mechanism for disappearing people he does not want to deal with. He drops employees into a pit, not metaphorically, into an actual pit, and the show plays it as a character quirk, a funny thing about a funny old man. But the show is also saying, this is what it looks like when someone has been powerful enough for long enough that the social contract, the basic mutual obligations that prevent people from dropping other people into pits, simply does not apply to them anymore. Burns exists in a space beyond the social contract, not because the social contract does not theoretically cover him, but because enforcing it requires resources and standing that nobody in Springfield possesses in sufficient quantity to make enforcement practical. The audience loved this about him, and the show knew they would love this about him. That was the point. The joke was never just about Burns. The joke was about us, about the way we are trained to find charisma and audacity and unapologetic self-interest entertaining, even when those qualities are attached to a person who is actively making our lives worse. Burns is beloved because the show made him lovable. And then the show asked you to think about what it means that you love someone like that. Most people skipped that part. There is a quality to Mr. Burns that the show uses more carefully than any other recurring character trait. It is his patience. Burns is not impulsive. He does not lose his temper in ways that cost him. He does not make decisions that are not, in some distant and calculating way, investments. The show gives him occasional vanity, occasional whimsy, and in one episode an inexplicable friendship with Homer that the episode itself treats as an anomaly. But underneath all of that, Burns operates on a time horizon that no one else in Springfield operates on. He is thinking about the next decade while Mayor Quimby is thinking about the next election and Homer is thinking about what is for dinner. This temporal asymmetry is one of the show's most precise observations about wealth and power. People with generational wealth have a different relationship to time than people living paycheck to paycheck. They can wait. They can absorb short-term losses that would be catastrophic for anyone else. They can let a bad year pass, knowing that the structure of their advantage means the bad year is an anomaly rather than a trajectory. And the people who are waiting for the bad year to end do not have this luxury. Their urgency is real. Their timeline is short. And in the negotiation between the patient and the urgent, the patient almost always wins. Burns can afford to be sued. Burns can afford a fine. Burns can afford to wait for a regulator to be replaced, or a law to be amended, or an inspector to decide the paperwork isn't worth completing. And Springfield, across the street and down the road, cannot afford any of those things. Springfield needs the tax revenue now. Springfield needs the jobs now. Springfield cannot wait for a better arrangement because the waiting itself has a cost that Springfield does not have the reserves to absorb. The show understood this asymmetry at the level of structure, and it encoded it in the relationship between Burns and Springfield that persists across all 36 seasons. Burns stays. Everyone else moves around him. What the show does with Homer that is more interesting than making him a fool is making him a mirror. He reflects back, with high fidelity and without defensiveness, the specific shape of what it means to be a certain kind of American man at a certain point in history. A man who was shaped by the expectation that the world would make sense if he just showed up and did what was required of him. Who found that the world did not quite make sense and responded by developing a robust tolerance for not understanding it. Who learned to find pleasure in small things because the large things were either unavailable or confusing or both. This is not a small truth. This is a description of the interior life of an enormous number of people. The Season 4 episode Homer's Triple Bypass takes Homer to the edge of his own mortality when he requires open-heart surgery that the family cannot afford. The comedy is present throughout the episode, but the emotional core is Homer's confrontation with the fact that his body, which he has spent his life treating as a vehicle for delivering his appetites their objects, has reached a point of consequence. He may die. He may leave Marge. He may leave Bart and Lisa without a father. And Homer, in this episode, does something he rarely does in the show's run. He slows down, he looks at his family and tries to see them clearly. He has a moment with Lisa that is as honest as any moment the show has ever produced. A simple statement of love that is also a statement of regret for the ways he has not been present enough to deserve the love he is feeling. He survives the surgery. He goes back to the donuts. The episode ends. But the episode did something. It said out loud that Homer's appetites are not just comedy. They are the accumulated habits of a man who has been managing something. And that something, while never specified, is legible in the texture of every scene where Homer eats instead of talks, sleeps instead of confronts, drinks instead of sits, with the difficulty of being present in his own life. The show loved Homer too much to diagnose him, but it described him with the precision of a diagnosis, and the audience that laughed at the description was also, in many cases, the audience that recognized themselves in it. There is a theory about what makes The Simpsons work that the show's creators have articulated in different ways over the years. The theory is that you are always laughing with the characters rather than at them. That the comedy emerges from recognition rather than superiority. That when Homer falls down the stairs or fails to understand a simple social dynamic or eats the thing he was saving for later, the laugh is not the laugh of someone who has never done a version of this thing. It is the laugh of someone who has. This is true of Homer more than any other character. Homer is legible in the way that only the most carefully drawn characters are legible. You know him the way you know someone you have lived with. You know which rooms he avoids and which ones he is drawn to. You know the specific quality of his happiness and the specific quality of his distress. You know that when he says everything is fine, it is almost never fine. And knowing all of that, you laugh. Because the alternative is something more complicated than a television episode has room for. The stupidity was never stupid. It was a translation. The show took the specific interior weather of a specific kind of life and translated it into broad comedy. And in doing so, it made that life visible in a way that it had rarely been visible before. Not as tragedy, not as social problem, as Homer. Who is on the couch? Who is watching something? Who is trying his best in the specific way that his best looks like, which is not always good enough but is always, somehow, enough to keep the house standing. And this is where the show does something that no amount of critical analysis can quite neutralize. It makes you love him, not in spite of all of this, not as a charity project, not as an exercise in empathy. You love Homer the way you love someone you know well, which means you know his limitations and they are part of what you love. Because the limitations are also what make him recognizable, what make him human, what make him the specific person who is standing in the specific kitchen of the specific house on Evergreen Terrace, rather than a general category of father or worker or American man. Homer is particular. That is his gift. The show made him particular over hundreds of episodes, adding details that accumulate into something that feels like a real person's specificity. The way he eats, the way he laughs, the way he is terrible at hiding things and also does not particularly try to hide them because the effort of concealment is more than his relationship with comfort will support. He is exhausting and he is warm and he is exactly the wrong person for most situations and also somehow exactly the right person for the specific situation of being Homer Simpson's family, the one that exists on the couch at 5:30 when he walks in the door with the nuclear rod still glowing faintly in his pocket. That family is lucky to have him. They are also, in various ways that the show documents, unlucky to have him. Both things are true. The show has always known both things are true. That is what makes it worth watching. Mr. Burns has a vault. The show references it in various ways across its run, and the vault is never quite explained with full precision because the vault does not need explanation. It contains what a vault contains, the accumulated result of many years of accumulation. The thing that happens when you live long enough and own enough that the natural growth of what you own outpaces any conceivable personal expense. This is wealth in its terminal form, wealth that has become its own gravity. wealth that pulls more wealth toward it not through any active effort but through the simple physics of already having enough. Burns does not want more money in the way that people who do not have money want money. He wants more money the way that certain people want to win, not for the object of the winning, but for the confirmation that they are the kind of person who wins. The money is a scoreboard. The scoreboard confirms a story about the world. The story is that some people are worth more than others, that this worthiness is reflected in what they own, and that the reflection is something close to justice. Burns believes this story completely. The show does not require him to articulate it, because people who benefit from a story almost never need to articulate it. They simply live inside it. They experience the story's conclusion, their own elevation, their own comfort, their own unquestioned right to continue accumulating as the natural state of things, not as ideology, as fact. And the comedy of Burns, the thing that makes him one of the great comic villains of American television, is the gap between the completeness of his self-belief and the absurdity of the self being believed in. He is old, he is frail, he has in several episodes been shown to be medically sustained by the sheer wealth of resources available to him. He is a cartoon of what accumulated power looks like from the outside, and the audience laughs. But Burns keeps the plant. Burns always keeps the plant. The comedy is about his person. The horror, for anyone who wants to sit with it, is about his persistence. The systems of Springfield are organized around the continuation of Mr. Burns. The regulatory systems exist in a relationship with the plant that has been managed to the point of predictability. The political systems receive from the plant what political systems require to continue operating as they are. The economic systems of the town depend on the plant's employment in a way that makes challenging the plant a threat to the town's own material survival. Burns did not build these arrangements through genius, though the show sometimes credits him with something like genius. He built them through duration, through being there long enough that the arrangements calcified around him, through the specific power that comes from being the thing that other things have organized themselves in relation to. He is, in a very direct sense, the ground on which Springfield stands. And the audience laughs at his skinny arms and his out-of-touch references and the fact that he cannot remember Homer's name. These things are funny. And the plant keeps running. Section 3. Homer's stupidity was never funny. Homer Simpson is a stupid man. This is not a controversial statement. It is one of the foundational premises of the show. Homer's low intelligence is the engine of approximately half the comedy that has ever appeared in The Simpsons. His inability to understand things, his failure to anticipate consequences, his capacity for making the worst possible decision in any given situation with total confidence and zero hesitation, these are the qualities that made him one of the most beloved television characters in the history of the medium. And the show, from very early on, was quietly trying to tell you something about why Homer is the way he is. Not that he was born this way. Not that he is simply a specific type of person, but that something happened to him. Something specific and documentable and ongoing. And the show, in between the donut jokes and the strangling gags and the scenes where Homer falls down a cliff and bounces to the bottom, kept putting the evidence in front of you and asking you to notice. You probably did not notice. Let us start with the most literal piece of evidence, the crayon. In the season 12 episode Homer discovers that he has an unusually low intelligence even by his own modest self-assessment and decides to get tested. The results confirm what the show has been telling us for 12 seasons. Homer's IQ qualifies as a clinical disability. But then the episode goes somewhere that no episode about a character's stupidity has any business going. Homer discovers, through a medical examination that somehow has never been performed in all the years he has been seeing doctors in Springfield, that there is a foreign object lodged in his brain, a crayon. A crayon from his childhood has been sitting inside Homer Simpson's skull since he was a small boy, physically obstructing his cognitive function, physically reducing the capacity of his brain to form and retain thoughts, physically making him less intelligent than he would otherwise have been. And when the crayon is removed, Homer becomes a different person. He becomes intelligent. Articulately, measurably, demonstrably intelligent. His IQ rises significantly. He begins to understand things he could not understand before. He engages with complex ideas. He sees the world with a clarity that he has never possessed. And the world he sees with that clarity is unbearable. He sees his job for what it is. He sees the town for what it is. He sees the accumulation of choices and circumstances and systems that have produced his life and the lives of the people around him, and it is too much. The clarity is a kind of suffering. Being intelligent in Springfield, the episode suggests, is not a gift. It is a form of torment. So Homer, in the episode's resolution, asks a friend to put the crayon back. He chooses stupidity. He chooses the fog. The audience found this profoundly moving and also very funny, because the show managed to do both things at the same time, which is one of the things The Simpsons has always done better than almost anything else on television. But the episode leaves a question sitting there that it does not answer, and that question is, how did the crayon get there? Homer shoved it up his nose as a child, is the implication. A small child did something chaotic, and the object traveled through the nasal cavity and lodged in the brain. Fine. That tracks with what the show establishes about Homer's earliest behaviors. But then the other question presents itself. How did Homer go through his entire childhood, his entire education, his entire adolescence and young adulthood, visiting doctors and getting checkups and presumably at some point having some form of medical imaging performed on his person, and not a single physician ever found a crayon in his brain? Either the medical care available to Homer during his formative years was catastrophically inadequate, which is possible and which connects to everything else the show tells us about Springfield's institutions, or someone knew the crayon was there and left it there. The show does not pursue this question, but it asks it in the structure of the story, in the gap between what should have been discovered and what actually was. Now let us go back further, to the environmental dimension of Homer's cognitive situation. The show establishes, across many episodes and through many different framings, that Homer has spent his entire adult working life in direct proximity to a nuclear reactor. His job title is Safety Inspector. His workspace is Sector 7G. His daily commute takes him through the plant's security checkpoint and down to the floor, where, presumably, the kind of controlled radiation that makes rats glow and fish grow, extra eyes is being produced and managed and occasionally allowed to escape into the surrounding environment. And Homer, who does not wear protective gear in any consistent way, who has been shown eating at his workstation, sleeping at his workstation, and once throwing a donut into the reactor core out of curiosity, has been doing this job for his entire adult life. The radiation theory that fans have developed around the show posits that the contamination from the plant is the explanation for multiple impossible things about Springfield's residents. But here's the thing about that theory that the show does not have to tell you because it has already shown you. It has shown you a man whose cognitive function is so impaired that he qualifies for clinical disability designation. It has shown you that this man works in a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations. It has shown you that this man's mother left when he was 6 years old, and that the trauma of that abandonment shaped his emotional development in ways the show explicitly tracks. It has shown you that this man had a foreign object in his brain for decades that was measurably reducing his intelligence. And it has shown you, in the crayon episode, that without that object, Homer Simpson is capable of being a functional, intelligent, emotionally aware person who can hold a meaningful job and contribute to his community in ways that go beyond falling into the margarine vat. All of these things are true within the show's universe simultaneously. And what they add up to, if you trace the lines from one to the other, is a portrait of a person who has been failed at every level. Failed by his environment, which was contaminated before he was born and which continued to contaminate him throughout his life. Failed by his institutions, which did not find the crayon, or did not remove it, or did not provide him with the kind of education and support that might have compensated for his cognitive challenges. Failed by the loss of his mother, which the show tracks with unusual emotional precision as the defining wound of his emotional life. Failed by the system that kept him employed at a job that was actively making him worse, in a facility that was actively harmful to him, under the authority of the man who was personally responsible for his mother's disappearance. Homer Simpson is not stupid because he was born that way. Homer Simpson is stupid because the world he was born into made him that way, and then made sure he stayed that way, because the version of Homer that would exist without all of that damage would be a fundamentally different kind of employee. The show told you this. It told you in the Crayon episode, and it told you in the Mona Simpson episodes, and it told you in the German Investors episode, where a more competent safety inspector would have shut the plant down in a week. It laid out the architecture of Homer's disadvantage with remarkable care and precision. And the audience, conditioned by 12 seasons of finding Homer's stupidity endearing and funny, watched the crayon episode, felt genuinely moved, and then went back to finding Homer's stupidity endearing and funny. Because the show gave them that option. It always gave them the comedy exit. It always made sure the truth was wrapped in something you could laugh at so that the laugh could insulate you from the implications of what you had just been shown. Now consider the specific nature of what Homer's intelligence looks like in the episodes where the crayon is briefly removed or where some other circumstance temporarily elevates his cognitive function. In those moments, Homer does not become a different character. He becomes a more complete version of the same character. He still loves Marge. He still loves his children. He is still fundamentally the person the show has always been about. But he can do things he previously could not do. He can solve problems. He can engage with ideas. He can see patterns and make connections and understand consequences before they materialize. And the thing he does with that enhanced intelligence almost immediately is recognize that his life is not what it should be. He sees the plant. He understands what the plant is doing. He can articulate the dynamics that keep him trapped there. He can see the system. And then he puts the crayon back, because seeing the system and being unable to change it is its own kind of suffering. This is the most devastating thing the show ever did. It did not tell you that Homer is unaware of his situation because he lacks the capacity to be aware. It told you that Homer has chosen unawareness, because awareness, in his specific situation, is worse than ignorance. He knows, on some level, that he is trapped. He chooses not to fully know, because fully knowing does not give him the tools to escape, only the vocabulary to describe his captivity. The audience cried at this episode, and then they came back next week for the donut jokes, which was entirely understandable, and which was also exactly what the show was making a point about. Now, let us think about what the show establishes through Homer's relationship with his father, because the Abe Simpson dimension of Homer's formation is a thread the show handles with unusual consistency. Abe Simpson is old. He is in a retirement home. He is rambling and confused and tells stories that go nowhere and forgets what year it is. He is played primarily as a comedic presence, a source of non sequiturs and anachronistic references, and the kind of aimless monologue that reads as dementia in a man of his age. But the show also tells you, clearly and without comedy, that Abe chose to lie to Homer for his entire childhood about the fate of his mother. Abe Simpson told Homer his mother was dead. He showed Homer a grave. He constructed a fiction designed to prevent Homer from knowing the truth, which was that his mother was alive and that Abe knew where she was, and that the reason she could not come home had nothing to do with death and everything to do with the man who signed Homer's paychecks. Why did Abe do this? The show eventually gives you the answer. Abe made a deal. Burns had committed a crime. Abe discovered it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would always have a job at the plant regardless of his performance. Abe sold his son's psychological well-being for a guaranteed employment contract. The show is very clear about this. It states it directly. And it is one of the most quietly horrifying revelations in the series, presented without fanfare and without the characters around it adequately registering what it means. What it means is that Homer's entire emotional architecture, his desperate need for love and approval, his terror of abandonment, his willingness to tolerate abuse from employers and institutions, rather than risk losing the one stable thing in his life, was built on a lie that his father chose to tell because his father had already decided that a comfortable lie was worth more than the truth. And then Homer grows up and becomes exactly the kind of employee that a man who makes that calculation would produce. He does not challenge. He does not resist. He does not confront. He endures and adapts and finds ways to be happy in circumstances that should not be tolerated. Because the alternative, the emotional reckoning that would follow from actually looking at his life with clear eyes, was made unavailable to him before he was old enough to ask for it. The show told you all of this. It told you in the Mona Simpson episodes, and in the Abe backstory episodes, and in the Crayon episode, and in the quiet, devastating final shot of Mother Simpson, where Homer watches his mother drive away for the second time and then sits on the roof of his car and looks at the stars for what feels like a very long time. And the next week, Homer was at the plant, and there were donuts, and everything was fine. The relationship between Homer and his family, examined closely, is where the show's most uncomfortable material lies. Homer loves his family. This is not in question. The show returns to this repeatedly, often in the final act of an episode when the lesson is being delivered and the music is coming in, and Homer is saying something that is sincere even if it is clumsily said. He loves them. The love is real and it is the foundation of the show's emotional life. But love, as the show depicts it across Homer's specific case, is not the same as presence, and it is not the same as understanding. And it is not the same as the sustained attention that would allow him to know his children the way his children need to be known. Bart needs to be challenged in ways that the school cannot reach him. He needs someone to find the shape of how his mind works and meet him there. He is restless and tactical and operates on instinct and impulse, and none of those qualities are valued by the institutions he moves through. And his father does not quite know how to value them either. Even though Homer's own brain works in ways that are not entirely dissimilar, Lisa needs to be heard. This is simpler and more impossible. She needs to say the thing she knows and have someone receive it at its actual level rather than nodding past it. She needs intellectual equals, and the town of Springfield has not provided her any. And her father, who loves her deeply, has approximately 1/10 of her cognitive processing speed and is aware of this in the way that he is aware of most uncomfortable truths about himself, which is to say he is not quite aware of it in any conscious way, but he feels it as a background discomfort that sometimes resolves itself as defensiveness. The show plays these dynamics for comedy: the choke, the dismissal, the Homer who sleeps through the recital. And the audience laughs because these are recognizable, because they have seen this father or been the child of this father, and comedy is the way the culture has decided to process that recognition without having to do anything about it. The show's relationship to tabloid media and celebrity coverage is a thread that runs through its entire run. Springfield is a town that watches a lot of television. This is established early and never contested. The couch, the television, the passive relationship between the family and whatever is being broadcast into their living room, these are constants. The family watches. The television produces. And the relationship between producer and consumer in this arrangement is one that the show examines with more precision than it is usually given credit for. In the Season 4 episode, Krusty Gets Cancelled, the entertainment industry's mechanics are laid out in miniature. Krusty's audience is taken by a competitor who is simply newer and shinier. The audience does not consider what they are abandoning. They do not weigh the quality of Krusty's show against the quality of Gabbo's. They respond to novelty with the automatic preference that novelty generates in any media ecosystem. Krusty is old. Gabbo is new. The math is simple. And then Krusty comes back, because celebrities always come back in this kind of story, and the comeback is celebrated with the same intensity that the departure was mourned, because the audience's emotional investment in Krusty is not really about Krusty. It is about the rhythm of narrative that celebrity culture provides: the rise, the fall, the return. These are the beats, and as long as the beats are present, the content can be more or less anything. The show understands this as a media structure and encodes it in the architecture of how Springfield relates to famous people generally. They love celebrities. They abandon them when something more interesting arrives. They rediscover them when the narrative arc demands it. And the celebrities themselves, Krusty most of all, have internalized this cycle to the point where they no longer question it. Krusty does not seek a genuine connection with his audience. He seeks ratings. The ratings are the love, and the love is the ratings. And this arrangement feels hollow and is hollow, but it is also the only arrangement available. There is an episode in Season 2 called Bart Gets Famous that we touched on before, but it warrants more attention here because of what it shows about the specific mechanics of minor celebrity. Bart's catchphrase makes him briefly relevant. He appears on television. He is recognized in public. He has the experience of being treated as significant by people who have been told to treat him as significant. And then the moment passes. The public moves on. Bart is left with the experience of having been wanted and then not wanted, which is a particular and disorienting experience that the show treats as comedy, but that has a real texture for the people who live it. The media in Springfield does not create culture. It processes it. It takes whatever is already there, whatever the town is already feeling or afraid of or excited by, and it reflects it back in simplified and dramatized form. And the town, seeing its own feelings reflected, feels understood and mistakes that feeling of understanding for the thing itself. Kent Brockman does not inform Springfield. He confirms what Springfield already suspects. There is a season 9 episode called The Joy of Sect that is the show's most direct engagement with mass persuasion and the mechanics of belonging. A cult arrives in Springfield. The Movementarians, they are called. And they recruit Springfield's residents not through force or deception in any obvious sense, but through the simple provision of community and meaning and a clear narrative about the world and one's place in it. Springfield joins the cult. Almost entirely. The few holdouts, including Marge for a while and then Bart and Lisa, are the minority. And the episode's comedy comes from the ease with which the town is converted, the speed with which people who should know better accept a framework, because the framework is offered with enough warmth and certainty and social pressure to make the alternative, continuing to navigate a world without a clear framework, feel lonelier than the cult. The episode is a satire of cults specifically, but it is also a satire of any system that provides community and meaning and narrative at the cost of critical thinking. And it is a portrait of how that trade-off, community for questioning, warmth for independence, belonging for accuracy, is one that most people will make most of the time when the conditions are right. Because the conditions were always right for Springfield. The town was always isolated enough, confused enough, underpowered enough, insufficiently equipped with the tools for collective self-examination to be susceptible to a compelling story told by someone who seemed confident about what the story meant. The media provides versions of this story. The government provides versions of this story. Mr. Burns provides a version of this story. And the audience of The Simpsons, watching the town fall for each version in turn, finds it funny because the versions Springfield falls for are obviously constructed, obviously serving someone else's interest, obviously not quite the truth. The versions the audience falls for are less obviously constructed. That is the joke the show cannot quite make directly, but it has been making it sideways for 36 years. And Springfield, confirmed, goes to bed satisfied, and wakes up the next morning no better equipped to understand the world than it was the night before. This is the media system the show described. This is the media system the audience laughed at. And this is the media system that the audience then went home and watched. Section 4. The media lied and Springfield cheered. Kent Brockman is a man with very good hair. He is Springfield's most prominent news anchor. He appears in dozens of episodes across the show's entire run. He delivers information to the people of Springfield with the calm authority of a man who has spent his career learning to sound credible regardless of what he is saying. And Kent Brockman, more than almost any other character in the show, is the vessel through which The Simpsons delivers its sharpest and most specific commentary on what American media actually is, what it does, and who it serves. The most famous Kent Brockman moment in the show's history is from the episode Deep Space Homer, in which Homer is selected to go to space on a NASA shuttle mission. During the mission, a colony of ants escapes containment aboard the craft. Kent Brockman, covering the launch from a news desk, receives a transmission from the shuttle that briefly appears to show giant ants before the camera adjusts to reveal they were simply regular ants in extreme close-up. And in that moment, before anyone has provided him with any additional information, before any expert has been consulted, before any verification of any kind has occurred, Kent Brockman makes an executive decision. He announces, on live television, that Earth has been conquered by a master race of giant space ants. He welcomes his new insect overlords. He offers to help identify those humans who would be willing to collaborate with the new regime in exchange for favorable treatment. And then the camera adjusts. The ants are regular ants. The shuttle is fine. Everything is fine. Kent Brockman moves on to the next segment. The audience explodes with laughter every time this scene is shown. It is one of the great comedy moments in the show's history. The line about welcoming the insect overlords has been quoted approximately as many times as any other single line in the series. But what Kent Brockman does in that scene is not actually funny. What Kent Brockman does is announce the end of human civilization based on a blurry camera image he has not even attempted to verify, pivot instantly from trusted news authority to collaborator with the enemy, and then, when the information is corrected, experience no apparent consequence for any of it. The next day, Kent Brockman is still the anchorman. He still has his desk and his good hair and his calm, authoritative voice. Springfield still watches him. Springfield still trusts him. The fact that he was willing to declare loyalty to a race of giant space ants the moment he thought they had won, with no evidence and no hesitation, does not appear to affect his standing in the community. The show is describing something about the relationship between credibility and accountability in broadcast media. A person in a position of broadcast authority can say almost anything, including things that are factually wrong in real time and obviously so, and the institutional credibility of the position itself absorbs and neutralizes the error. The anchor chair confers trustworthiness. The trustworthiness does not depend on whether the things the anchor says are true. It depends on whether the anchor continues to appear in the anchor chair. The show was telling you this in 1994. It was telling you it was a comedy. And the audience laughed and then went back to watching their trusted news anchors on their local affiliates. Now consider the episode Sideshow Bob Roberts, in which Sideshow Bob runs for mayor of Springfield. The episode is a political satire so detailed and so specifically structured that it has only gotten more resonant in the decades since it aired. Bob, a villain with genuine intelligence and genuine malice, runs for mayor on a platform of being better than the current mayor. He loses the primary in what appears to be a fair election. And then, through a chain of events involving voter fraud, he wins. The voter fraud in the episode is operationally simple. Dead people voted. The registrations of Springfield's deceased residents were used to generate votes for Bob that he could not have won fairly. And Kent Brockman covers the election. Kent Brockman covers the election results with the same calm authority with which he covers everything. He reports the numbers. He calls the race. He presents the outcome as the legitimate product of a democratic process. He does not investigate. He does not question. He reads what is given to him and presents it as news. Lisa and Bart, who are children, investigate the voter rolls and discover the fraud. They do it themselves, without resources, without institutional support, because they are curious and because they think something seems wrong. The episode's resolution involves the fraud being exposed and Bob being arrested. But the episode's observation, the thing it is quietly saying in between the jokes, is about who actually does investigative journalism and what institutional journalism does instead. The children investigate. The anchor reads, and the audience that was watching Kent Brockman, trusting the calm authority of his delivery, getting their information about the election from him, had no way of knowing that the information was wrong because the person delivering it had not checked. This is the gap between journalism and performance. Between the project of finding out what is true and the project of broadcasting something credible, and The Simpsons mapped this gap with precision in 1994, in an episode that is remembered primarily for Sideshow Bob's elaborate plan and his exasperated interactions with Bart. The media observations are the part the audience forgot. Now let us look at how the show treats Springfield's media ecosystem more broadly, because Kent Brockman is not the only media figure in town. There is Krusty the Clown, who hosts a children's entertainment program that is, at various points in the show's run, revealed to be financially exploitative, ethically compromised, operated by people with organized crime connections, and built on a foundation of Krusty simply not caring what goes on the air as long as the check's clear. Krusty licenses his name and image to a range of products, many of which are of questionable quality and safety. He endorses things he has not tried. He performs things he does not believe. He is the face of a brand that has no relationship with what the face actually stands for, and Springfield's children love him. They love him with the kind of uncritical, total adoration that children bring to entertainment figures before they develop the tools to evaluate what they are actually experiencing. They watch him because he is on the screen and he is energetic and he makes them laugh and he is the thing they have always watched. The show uses Krusty to describe the structure of children's media specifically, the way that broadcast reach creates trust that has nothing to do with the broadcaster deserving it, the way that children cannot distinguish between a person who genuinely likes them and a person who has realized that appearing to like them is a profitable behavior. And Krusty, who does not especially like children and who finds his work exhausting and unfulfilling and has been numbing himself to it for years with gambling and alcohol and whatever else the episode calls for, is the most famous person in Springfield. Children worship him. Their parents grew up watching him. His image is on the bedroom walls of every Springfield child who has ever appeared in the background of a street scene. The show does not let Krusty be simply a bad person who has stumbled into media. It makes him a complicated person who has made choices and paid prices and is genuinely suffering inside the machine he built. The episode where Krusty reconnects with his estranged rabbi father is one of the most emotionally precise things the show has ever done, but it also does not let the complexity excuse the mechanism. The mechanism is this: a person who does not love the audience appears every day in a medium that implies he does. The appearance generates the trust generates the money sustains the appearance, and the audience, in the case of the show's audience watching Krusty on their television, laughed at the obvious fictional clown while being entirely unaware of the degree to which the same mechanism operated in every other media relationship they maintained. The most direct episode in this conversation is Homer Badman from Season 6, which is one of the show's most uncomfortable and most frequently overlooked pieces of media criticism. Homer, at a convention, accidentally grabs the rear end of a babysitter who had been leaning against him when he reached for a rare piece of candy she had in her possession. The babysitter, understandably upset, reports the incident. A tabloid news program gets hold of the story, and within days, Homer Simpson is a nationally known figure, identified as a sexual predator by a segment of breathless, evidence-free broadcast journalism. The show in this episode is not making a case for Homer's innocence or guilt. It is making a case about what happens when the media mechanism gets hold of a story and runs it through its standard procedures, regardless of whether those procedures produce anything resembling the truth. The tabloid program segments are shot and edited to make Homer look like a monster. Context is removed. Statements are spliced. The visual language of serious investigative journalism is applied to content that has not been subjected to anything resembling serious investigation. And Springfield watches. Springfield watches and believes, because the information is coming through the medium, and the medium has trained them to believe what comes through it. The resolution of the episode comes through an amateur video, filmed by a reclusive neighbor, that captures the actual moment of the incident and makes clear what actually happened. And the tabloid program airs this video and reverses its coverage entirely, pivoting from monster to good guy with the same mechanical certainty that characterized its original condemnation. Homer is rehabilitated, but the episode is not celebrating his rehabilitation. It is asking you to notice that the same machine that destroyed him rebuilt him, that the mechanism that produced the false narrative also produced the correction, and that the people who consume media through this machine have no way of knowing at any given moment whether they are receiving the first narrative or the correction to the first narrative, because both narratives come through the same channel. Both are delivered with the same calm authority. Both have the same production values and the same music and the same medium shot of a presenter looking directly at the camera. The show told you this in 1994. The show told you it with a donut, and the audience laughed. The Springfield Police Department exists in a category adjacent to local government, but with its own particular logic. Chief Wiggum is the third leg of Springfield's civic stool, after Quimby and the plant, and he is drawn with a precision that goes beyond simple incompetence caricature. Wiggum is not stupid in the way the jokes suggest. He is indifferent. He has separated the concept of public safety from his daily professional practice the way a doctor might, over many years of institutional frustration, separate the concept of healing from the daily practice of paperwork and billing codes. The police in Springfield do not prevent crime. They respond to crime, usually late, with equipment that does not work, and they process the response in a way that generates the correct paperwork without necessarily connecting to any meaningful outcome. Wiggum knows this. He is at peace with it in a way that is more honest than disturbing, because he has long since abandoned the pretense that what he does and what the institution claims to do are the same thing. In the Season 7 episode Homer vs. Patty and Selma, Homer ends up owing money to Patty and Selma after a bad investment. The financial embarrassment is played for comedy, as is the reversal of power it creates in Homer's relationship with his sisters-in-law. But the investment itself, a failed venture in pumpkins, is a precise depiction of what happens when a person with no investment capital, no financial cushion, and no professional advice decides to participate in a market that is designed for people who already have money. Homer loses. He always loses when he tries to participate in financial systems that were not designed for him. This is a reliable feature of the show rather than an exceptional plot element, and the reliability is the point. The game is rigged not by any specific villain, but by the structural arrangement of who has what kinds of access and what kinds of protection when the inevitable losses arrive. The show's relationship to civic participation is worth examining alongside its political portraits. Springfield votes. The citizens of Springfield show up at town halls, sign petitions, attend ribbon cuttings, and participate in the civic rituals that democratic governance requires. They are, in this sense, a civically engaged community, and the show depicts, with gentle persistence, how little this engagement changes about the actual conditions of their lives. The town hall meeting is a recurring location. Citizens gather, they speak. Someone says something pointed and true, and the room responds with the kind of energy that feels like it is going somewhere. And then the meeting ends. The issue that brought them there remains unresolved, or is resolved in a way that benefits the people who were already benefiting from it, or is resolved in a way that creates a new problem adjacent to the old one. Proposition 24, in the Season 5 episode Bart's Dog Gets an F, is not a political episode in any overt sense, but the show's relationship to ballot measures, to the way that civic power is channeled into yes/no questions that often obscure as much as they reveal, is present in how it depicts any moment where Springfield's residents are asked to make a collective decision. What they choose depends on what they have been told, and what they have been told depends on who has the resources to tell them. The plant funds the campaign shapes the question determines the outcome. And the citizens of Springfield who voted feel that they participated in a decision because they did. They just did not make it. This is not a cynical portrait. Cynicism would be comfortable. It would allow you to disengage on the grounds that the whole thing is broken and nothing matters. The show does not offer this comfort. It keeps showing Springfield showing up, keeps showing the citizens caring, keeps showing the hope that this time the meeting will produce something different, and it keeps showing the same structures absorbing that hope and continuing to operate as they always have. The hope is not a delusion. The hope is the thing that is being relied upon. The show's most sustained portrait of civic failure is not any single episode. It is the accumulation of all the episodes where Springfield's residents try to change something, and the something remains unchanged. There is a physics to this accumulation that works across the series in a way that individual episodes cannot produce on their own. Any single episode of a group failing to fix a problem can be read as comedy. 2 episodes can be read as a recurring bit. 100 episodes, across 30 years, of a community repeatedly failing to address the conditions that are harming it, produces something that is not quite comedy anymore. It produces a portrait of a system. The system does not fail because the people in it are stupid. The show is careful about this, more careful than it is sometimes given credit for. The people of Springfield are not incapable of identifying their problems. They identify their problems frequently. They name them, they vote on them, they protest about them, they write letters to Brockman. They confront Burns at public meetings. And then the meeting ends, and the problem remains, and the next episode begins. What the system does is absorb. It takes the energy of the objection and dissipates it through process. The meeting was held. The vote was taken. The ribbon was cut. The concern was registered. And because the concern was registered, because the form of response exists, the absence of actual change does not register as a failure of the system. It registers as the system working. This is not cynicism. This is the show's most accurate observation about how contemporary democratic systems manage dissent. They provide process. The process provides legitimacy. The legitimacy provides the appearance of responsiveness, and the underlying arrangement continues. Springfield burns the tire fire. Springfield holds the town meeting. Springfield goes home. And next week the tire fire is still burning. Springfield's civic hope is what keeps Springfield from asking harder questions about the arrangements it has inherited, and the people who benefit from those arrangements know this and cultivate it carefully. Mayor Quimby at the ribbon cutting, shaking hands and nodding gravely, is the image of this dynamic fully realized. He is present. He is warm. He is publicly grateful for the citizens' trust. And he will do what he was going to do anyway. The media and the government in Springfield exist in a relationship that the show depicts, across its run, as mutually sustaining. Brockman covers Quimby. Quimby provides Brockman with events. The events provide the coverage. The coverage provides the appearance of democratic accountability. The appearance of democratic accountability allows the arrangement to continue without generating the kind of sustained public pressure that might actually change anything. This is not a conspiracy. The show is careful to not make it a conspiracy, because a conspiracy would require coordination, would require a meeting where the participants decided to sustain the arrangement, would require intentionality. The arrangement does not require intentionality. It requires only that each participant act in their own immediate interest, and that their immediate interests be aligned in ways that happen to produce, as a side effect, the perpetuation of an arrangement that serves them. Brockman is not covering Quimby because Quimby told him to cover Quimby. He is covering Quimby because Quimby produces events, and events are what he needs for the broadcast. Quimby is not providing events to ensure favorable coverage. He is providing events because events are how he demonstrates that he is governing. The arrangement does not need to be managed because it manages itself. This is how most of the actual mechanisms the show depicts actually work. Not through sinister coordination, through aligned incentives and the absence of countervailing pressure strong enough to disturb the equilibrium. Springfield has the news it has because the news it has is the news that is possible given the conditions under which news is produced in Springfield. Change the conditions and you change the news. The conditions have not changed. The cameras are on. The mayor is at the ribbon. The ribbon falls. This is what accountability looks like when the accountable have managed the accounting. Section 5. The government was always the villain. Springfield has a mayor. His name is Joe Quimby. He is a man of considerable physical presence and limited personal integrity. He has a Kennedy accent and Kennedy hair and what appears to be an unbroken record of using municipal authority to benefit himself, his associates, and various women who are not his wife. Mayor Quimby is incompetent, corrupt, self-interested, and re-elected consistently by the people of Springfield in every election the show depicts. This is not a mystery. The show is not subtle about why this is the case. Quimby survives politically because the alternatives the show presents are always worse, and because the town's political culture has normalized a specific kind of transactional corruption to the point where voters no longer expect anything different. A politician who steals from the public, the show implies, is at least a known quantity. You know what Quimby is. You have accommodated his presence, the devil you know. But let us look at what Quimby actually does in specific episodes, because the comedy of his corruption is so well executed that it can obscure how accurately the show is describing something about local government. In the episode Marge versus the Monorail, which is widely regarded as one of the greatest episodes in the show's history and which was written by Conan O'Brien, Springfield receives a windfall. A large fine is levied against Burns for an environmental violation, and the town suddenly has a significant sum of money that could be spent on civic improvement. What the town needs, the episode makes clear, is better infrastructure. The roads are inadequate, the schools are underfunded. The basic systems that support daily life in Springfield are deteriorating. But at a town meeting where the budget is to be discussed, a salesman arrives. His name is Lyle Lanley. He sells monorails. He has a song. It is a very good song. It is catchy and enthusiastic and expertly paced. And by the time it is over, the entire assembled population of Springfield is convinced that what they need is a monorail. Not roads, not schools, a monorail. The episode was clearly modeled on The Music Man, the musical about a con man who sells instruments to a Midwestern town. The resemblance is explicit and deliberate. Lanley is a con man. The monorail he builds is defective. The whole enterprise is a fraud. But here is what the episode is describing underneath the Harold Hill pastiche. It is describing the mechanism by which public funds are captured. The routine is precise. A community has money that could improve basic services. A person with a polished sales pitch arrives and redirects the community's attention towards something exciting and new and visually impressive. The community, swept up in the excitement, votes to spend its windfall on the exciting thing rather than the boring but necessary thing. The monorail is not a metaphor for any single real infrastructure fraud. It is a template for a recurring structure in municipal finance, the pattern by which public money intended for dull but essential maintenance gets redirected towards spectacular but impractical prestige projects, usually with someone in the middle extracting significant value from the transaction. The episode is set in a town meeting. The decision is made democratically. The audience at the meeting votes for the monorail because Lanley's presentation was better than any presentation for repairing the roads could possibly be. You cannot make a road repair exciting. You cannot make it sing. And the government, in the form of Quimby and the assembled council members, goes along with it because the crowd is enthusiastic and because nobody in a position of institutional authority has done the basic due diligence that would have revealed Lanley's fraud before the contract was signed. The show wrote this in 1993 and made it one of the funniest episodes ever produced, and the audience has been quoting Mono Dio, rail, for 30 years. But the show is telling you something about how local government works that is a great deal less funny when it is not wrapped in a song. Now let us discuss the police, because Chief Wiggum deserves his own section of this conversation. Clancy Wiggum is the chief of police in Springfield. He is overweight, easily confused, motivated primarily by food, personally cowardly, professionally lazy, and occupies one of the most important positions of civic authority in the town with a consistency of failure that would be impressive if it were deliberate. The show uses Wiggum to deliver some of its most blatant jokes about law enforcement inadequacy. He misidentifies suspects. He arrives at crime scenes after the relevant events have concluded. He does not file paperwork. He loses evidence. He is bribed. He accepts the first explanation anyone offers him for anything and does not follow up. And he is beloved by the audience, the same way that Krusty is beloved, the same way that Homer is beloved, with a warmth that comes from familiarity and from the way the show gives all of its major characters genuine human dimensions alongside their obvious failures. But Chief Wiggum, examined as a portrait of institutional law enforcement rather than as a comedy character, is describing something specific and familiar. In the episode Homer versus Patty and Selma, the subplot involves Wiggum and his department. In dozens of other episodes, Wiggum's department is shown to be not merely ineffective, but actively complicit in the maintenance of Springfield's various forms of institutional wrongdoing. The police are not independently corrupt in the cynical sense of taking bribes from criminals. They are institutionally captured in the more mundane sense of simply not pursuing investigations that would be inconvenient for the people with power in the town. Burns is never seriously investigated. The labor violations at the plant are never seriously investigated. The structural corruption of the local government is never seriously investigated. These are not things Wiggum has been specifically instructed to ignore. They are things that the institutional culture of his department has simply never developed the habit of looking at. Because you do not develop that habit in a town where the person who would be the target of the investigation is the primary source of employment, political funding, and economic activity. The show captures this perfectly in the structure of Who Shot Mr. Burns, where Wiggum's investigation is thorough within its extremely narrow parameters. He investigates. He follows leads. He almost convicts the wrong person through a combination of circumstantial evidence and genuine investigative effort applied to the wrong question. The right question, the one that would have required him to look at the entire ecology of who benefits from Burns's power and why no one with the authority to challenge that power has ever seriously done so, is not a question that appears in his investigation. It is not a question that appears anywhere in the show's treatment of law enforcement. The police in Springfield enforce the laws that apply to the people who are not powerful enough to escape them and leave everything else alone. This is the accurate description of how law enforcement functions in communities where there is a significant power disparity between institutions and individuals. And the show renders this with comic precision across hundreds of episodes, giving you Wiggum eating donuts at every crime scene so that you can enjoy the specific absurdity of his failures without necessarily noticing the structural pattern. Now consider what the show does with the school. Springfield Elementary is one of the most vividly depicted educational institutions in the history of television. It has a principal, a guidance counselor, a rotating cast of teachers, a cafeteria, a budget that is perpetually inadequate, a faculty that is largely demoralized, and a student body that includes one genuinely exceptional child who is consistently failed by the system designed to serve her. The show uses the school to describe the experience of underfunded public education with remarkable specificity. In Bart's Dog Gets an F, the episode is about the family dog, but the school is present as background. In many other episodes, the school is the primary setting. And what the show consistently shows you is an institution that is doing its best with resources that are systematically inadequate because the people who control those resources have decided that the school is not a priority. When Burns drills for oil beneath Springfield Elementary and takes the money that was in the school's oil reserve, the episode is not just a Burns' villainous story. It is a story about what happens when educational funding is tied to assets that can be extracted by private interests. The school had money, literally beneath it, and the system that was supposed to protect that money from extraction had no mechanism capable of stopping the extraction. The show's most pointed educational observation is Lisa Simpson herself. Lisa is a gifted child in an institution that cannot serve her. The show follows her attempt to advocate for herself, to get the resources she needs, to be recognized as the kind of student whose potential deserves cultivation. And the institution fails her, consistently and systematically. Not because the individuals in it are malicious, but because the system does not have the resources or the structural capacity to do what she needs it to do. The audience loves Lisa. They root for her. They are moved by her struggles. And they do not, in general, connect those struggles to the show's consistent depiction of the public systems that are failing her as institutions that have been deliberately underfunded and undermined by the same power structures that produce Quimby and Burns and Wiggum. The show told you all of this. It told you through a cartoon saxophone player with a red dress, and the audience found her inspiring. And then they went back to watching Kent Brockman. The show's relationship to class is worth examining as a distinct thread from its relationship to wealth. Because the Simpsons family is not poor, the show makes this clear enough. They are working class, which in the American context of the show's golden years meant something specific. A family that owned things, that had stability, that did not worry about whether the lights would stay on, but that also had no margin, no cushion. The kind of family where one major unexpected expense is a crisis rather than an inconvenience. And the show's comedy frequently emerges from the gap between the life the family would like to be living and the life they can actually afford. Homer's bowling nights, Marge's small indulgences, the vacations that do not quite achieve what vacations are supposed to achieve, the car that is one bad month away from being the car they cannot fix. The American working class of the 1990s recognized this family immediately. Not the specifics, not the nuclear plant or the animated aesthetic, but the fundamental arithmetic. The month that comes out even if nothing goes wrong. The career that is a job rather than a calling. The house that is yours as long as the bank agrees that it is yours. By the time the show reached its teenage years in the 2000s, the economic conditions that made Homer's life plausible were becoming increasingly unavailable to the people who used to live them. The union jobs were migrating or disappearing. The home ownership that Homer assumed was migrating out of reach for the generation below his. The stability of the just barely enough life was becoming the aspiration rather than the default, and the show did not change. Homer still had the job. The house was still there. The family still functioned on the same arithmetic that had always worked. This frozen quality is both the show's formal constraint and its most inadvertent political statement. It is depicting a life that is no longer reliably available to the people it is depicting it for, and it does not know this, or cannot address it, because the format requires continuity, and continuity requires that Homer always go back to work on Monday. Homer's various business ventures across the run of the series are worth examining as a collective portrait. He has been, in different episodes, a snowplow operator, a food truck entrepreneur, a personal assistant, a country music manager, a beer brewer, a grease reseller, a bodyguard, a bowling alley owner, a safety inspector who independently contracts, a gig worker of various kinds. Each venture is treated as a discrete adventure with a clean beginning, middle, and end. Each ends with Homer back at the nuclear plant, which is both the punchline of the story and the show's recognition that the alternative economy Homer keeps trying to access is not actually stable enough to build a life on. The ventures are played as misadventures, but the pattern they form is the pattern of a certain kind of American economic experience. The person who is trying to find a way to participate in the economic system at a level above the one they were assigned, who finds that the systems governing each attempted upgrade are not neutral, who discovers that the market for people like Homer is either exploitative or unreliable or both, and who returns each time to the baseline job, not because the baseline job is good, but because the alternatives keep failing. Homer's bowling alley venture from the season 4. The show's relationship to work itself, separate from the question of specific jobs or economic conditions, is worth examining as a sustained theme. Work in Springfield is almost never meaningful, in the way that productivity discourse suggests work should be meaningful. Homer does not find purpose in nuclear safety inspection. The job is a container for his time, a structure around which the day organizes itself, a source of the paycheck that keeps the arithmetic working. The purpose Homer finds is not in the work. It is in the moments around the work, the drive, the donut, the nap at the console, the end of the day, the drive home. This portrait of work as containment rather than fulfillment is one of the show's most honest contributions to how the American working life looks from inside it. The cultural narrative around work, especially in the period of the show's peak influence, emphasized passion and purpose, and the idea that the right job would feel like not working at all. The show depicted, across hundreds of episodes, a man who goes to a job that does not resemble this description in any way, and who has made a life that is not diminished by this fact. Homer's life is not good because his work is good. Homer's life is good, to the degree that it is good, because of what is not the work. Because of Marge and the children and the couch and the beer and the neighborhood and the specific, particular texture of the everyday that surrounds the job, even as the job surrounds the everyday. The show is making an argument here that the culture around it is not making. The argument is that a meaningful life and a meaningful career are not the same thing, and that people who have found the first without the second have not failed. They have simply organized their meaning differently than the narrative asks them to. Homer has organized his meaning in the kitchen and on the couch and at the bowling alley and in the car on the way home. The plant is where he goes between meaning. The audience, many of whom went to jobs that did not feel like their calling, found this recognizable, and finding it recognizable, they laughed. And laughing, they did not quite hear the argument the show was making about what their work was actually worth to them compared to what came after the whistle. Episode, Homer's Barbershop Quartet adjacent episode, and his other side businesses operate on the same logic. The initial enthusiasm, the brief period of apparent success, the arrival of the thing that ends it, the return to the plant. What the show is drawing is a portrait of economic mobility as a story Americans tell themselves about the economy rather than a feature of the economy as it actually operates. The story says, work hard, find an opportunity, seize it, and you can change your circumstances. The show says, Homer works hard, finds opportunities, seizes them, and ends up back at the plant. Not because Homer is deficient, though the comedy requires you to believe he is. Because the opportunities themselves are structured in ways that make sustained success for people at Homer's level of capital and connection quite difficult. The show never says this out loud. It plays it as Homer being Homer. But the arithmetic of all those ventures, added together, tells a different story. One where the individual keeps trying and the system keeps resetting. There is a quality to Springfield's economic life that is worth naming beyond the individual episode examples. The town's economy is circular in a way that benefits the people who are already at the top of the circle. Money flows from the plant's workers into the local businesses. The local businesses sustain the town's non-plant economy. The town's non-plant economy employs people who also work at the plant or whose family members work at the plant. The plant is the anchor of the system. Remove it, and the circle collapses. This is the economic logic of the company town, which is a very old American institution, and Springfield represents a version of it that has been sophisticated enough to not look like a company town from the outside. There are multiple businesses. There are multiple employers. There is a downtown, a residential neighborhood, a commercial district. The diversity of visible economic activity masks the underlying dependency. But the dependency is there. When the plant has an episode, the town has an episode. When Burns threatens to close the plant, Springfield mobilizes to prevent it, not out of loyalty to Burns, but out of survival instinct. The plant's survival and the town's survival have been made, across decades of arrangement, the same thing. This is not accidental. The show does not say it is accidental. The show depicts in various episodes Burns's awareness that his economic position in Springfield is the source of his political position and his social position and his practical immunity from accountability. He knows what he is to Springfield. He has worked for decades to ensure that what he is to Springfield is irreplaceable. Homer is not just an employee at the plant. Homer is, in a structural sense, a hostage, not against his will. He does not experience his employment as coercive, but his material circumstances and the material circumstances of his family are contingent on the continued operation of a facility run by a man who once drove his mother into exile. This is the economic truth that the comedy version of Homer's relationship to Burns cannot quite contain. The joke is that Homer does not know his boss's name. The reality is that his boss's name is the load-bearing element of his entire material life. Section 6. The economy was rigged, and everyone knew it. Homer Simpson makes a modest wage. This is established clearly and early in the show. Homer is a nuclear safety inspector at a power plant. He earns a salary that is enough to maintain a house, a car, and a family of 5 in a way that is recognizably lower middle class. They are not wealthy. They are not desperately poor. They exist in the specific American economic band, where there is just enough stability to make comfort feel possible and just enough precarity to make disaster feel imminent. And the show, from the very beginning, was mapping this economic position with a precision that made it genuinely uncomfortable to look at directly, so the show wrapped it in jokes, and the audience unwrapped the jokes and kept the funny parts, and put the uncomfortable parts down somewhere and forgot about them. Let us start with the house. 742. Evergreen Terrace is one of the most famous addresses in the history of fictional architecture. It is a modest house in a modest neighborhood. It has a living room with a couch and a television, a kitchen with a refrigerator that is frequently referenced as not containing enough food, a garage that Homer regularly converts into something else, and a bedroom where Homer and Marge have a marriage that the show treats, across its best episodes, with genuine tenderness. The house is not a glamorous house. The show does not present it as such. It presents it as what it is, a working-class home in a working-class neighborhood, maintained at a standard that requires Homer's salary to be adequate, and which becomes precarious whenever Homer's salary is disrupted. And Homer's salary is disrupted constantly. Homer loses his job. Homer takes on second jobs. Homer invests money in schemes that do not work. Homer gets into debt. Homer makes financial decisions that produce immediate small pleasures and longer-term damage to the family's stability. These things happen throughout the show, and they are played as comedy because Homer's specific method of making bad decisions is funny. The bad decisions themselves are not. What the show is consistently depicting is the economic reality of a family living paycheck to paycheck in a system where the margin between stability and crisis is extremely small. A single lost job, a single unexpected expense, a single financial mistake of moderate size, and the Simpsons are in serious trouble. The episode Homer vs. Patty and Selma from Season 6 makes this explicit and then plays it for laughs. Homer has made a bad investment. The family is in debt. Homer does not tell Marge because he cannot face the conversation. He takes a job as a limousine driver, borrowed from Patty and Selma, which humiliates him in front of people he considers beneath him on the social hierarchy. The show plays this primarily as a story about pride and humiliation, but it is also a story about what economic precarity feels like from the inside. The specific shame of needing to take a job you consider beneath you, because the alternative is confronting a debt you cannot pay. The way that maintaining the appearance of stability can become as exhausting as the instability itself. The way that the gap between what you are and what the people around you think you are creates a kind of performance tax that has to be paid constantly and invisibly. This is not an unusual experience. It is, for a significant portion of the American middle class, an extremely common one. And The Simpsons depicted it with enough specificity and accuracy that it resonated with millions of people who recognized the shape of it from their own lives. They recognized it and then laughed at it, because the show gave them that option, and because laughing is easier than sitting with the recognition. Now consider the episode King Size Homer, where Homer attempts to gain enough weight to qualify for disability accommodations so that he can work from home. The episode is structured as a comedy about Homer's eating habits and his creative approach to gaming the system. And it is very funny. The visual of Homer becoming morbidly obese by design, the specific logic of his plan, the inevitable disaster that results, all of it is comedy executed at a high level. But underneath the comedy, the episode is describing something that people with disabilities actually navigate. The calculation of what accommodations are available, what qualifications are required, what the system will and will not recognize as a legitimate claim. Homer's approach is fraudulent within the episode's narrative, but the episode's treatment of why he wants to work from home, because his job is physically exhausting and psychologically deadening, and he would rather be comfortable in his own space, is not entirely unsympathetic. The show does not make the disability accommodation system itself the villain, but it uses Homer's attempt to access that system as a way of showing you how the system looks from the perspective of someone who is trying to get through a working life in a body and a situation that makes the standard conditions of that working life difficult to sustain. And the employer's response to Homer's accommodation within the episode is to make him responsible for a critical safety function while working from home, which Homer then nearly destroys the plant trying to manage. The joke is about Homer's incompetence. The observation is about what happens when workplace accommodation is granted grudgingly and inadequately and without any real commitment to making it work. The show does these things in tandem so consistently that it becomes hard to separate the comedy from the social observation, which was, of course, the point. Let us look at one of the show's most direct treatments of the labor relation specifically. In the episode Last Exit to Springfield, which is season 4 and which is one of the most celebrated in the show's history, Homer becomes the head of the nuclear plant's union in a circumstance that was essentially accidental. Burns wants to eliminate the dental plan from the workers' benefits package. Homer, who initially does not care about this, is reminded by Lisa that losing the dental plan means she cannot get the braces she needs. And Homer, galvanized by a specific and personal consequence, decides to fight. The episode is a comedy about Homer as an unlikely union leader. It is also a remarkably accurate depiction of how labor negotiations work and of the specific tactics that management uses to erode worker solidarity. Burns goes through almost every standard playbook move. He tries to buy Homer off personally with better benefits for Homer alone, in the hope that a separate deal for the leader will fracture the collective position. He tries to undermine morale by making the strike conditions miserable. He tries to use the media, through a segment on Kent Brockman's program, to paint the workers as unreasonable. He makes concession gestures that are not actual concessions. Homer resists all of this, largely by accident. He is so confident in his own position and so bad at negotiating that he cannot be outmaneuvered because he does not recognize the maneuvers. Burns's most sophisticated tactics bounce off Homer, because Homer is not following the game theory that would make those tactics effective. The episode resolves with the workers winning, but the show is not triumphalist about this. The victory is contingent on Homer's accidental effectiveness, which cannot be reproduced. It is specific to these circumstances. And the structural power imbalance that made Burns's tactics possible, the fact that he has access to lawyers and strategists and resources that the workers do not, is still in place at the end of the episode. The dental plan is restored, and next week, Burns is back in his office. The show is describing the limits of individual labor action in a system where management holds structural advantages that make every worker victory temporary and every concession potentially reversible. And it was doing this in what remains one of the most watched and most loved episodes in the show's history. The audience went to work on Monday. The same episode's ending shot, where Homer and Marge dance together in the living room in the dark, is one of the most beautiful images the show has ever produced. It is a moment of pure domestic joy. Homer did something that mattered. His family will have the dental plan. Lisa will get her braces. The small victory of a working man's accidental stand against a billionaire's cost-cutting is rendered with genuine warmth. And then the episode ends and the loop continues and Burns is still in charge and Homer is still in Sector 7G and the dental plan is there until the next contract negotiation. The beauty of the ending is real, and it does not contradict the structure the show has spent the episode laying out. Both things are true at the same time. That is what the show was always doing. The relationship between Bart and the school's sorting system is worth staying with, because the show returns to it so frequently that it becomes the closest thing the education storylines have to a thesis. Bart is sorted early. He is sorted by Mrs. Krabappel's Fs, by Skinner's disciplinary files, by the way teachers look at him when he walks in the door, already knowing what he is going to be before he has quite had the chance to demonstrate it. and the sort once made is sticky. The systems of the school are not designed to revisit their own categorizations. They are designed to process children through a pipeline, and the pipeline has predetermined exit points. What is particularly precise about the show's depiction is that Bart is not sorted because he is bad. He is sorted because he is a mismatch. The curriculum does not speak his language. The rules do not account for how his energy moves. The expectations of stillness and attention that school requires are expectations that his specific nervous system does not easily meet. And the institution, faced with a child who does not fit the template, does not adjust the template. It adjusts the child's file. There is a quiet sadness underneath the Bart jokes that the show acknowledges more often than it gets credit for. In the Season 1 episode Bart the Genius, Bart briefly attends a school for gifted children after cheating on an aptitude test. And what he finds there is not comfort. He finds alienation of a different kind. He does not belong in the gifted school either. He is between categories, which means the system has no good place for him, which means the system will leave him where it has already put him. He goes back to Springfield Elementary. The F waits for him on the other side of the door. Lisa's educational experience is the inverse. She fits the template perfectly, which creates its own set of problems. She is so well suited to the sorting system that the system advances her without ever quite addressing the fact that being advanced is not the same as being educated. She can pass every test. She cannot always make friends. She is the person the system was built to serve, and she is still lonely inside it. The show understood that the sorting system produces two kinds of casualties: the children it leaves behind, and the children it narrows into the shape of their test scores. The extracurricular life of Springfield Elementary is worth dwelling on. The school has a band. Lisa is in the band. The band is underfunded, and the instruments are in a state of managed deterioration that the school has learned to present as character. The football team has resources that the band does not, which is a distribution the show presents without comment because the audience already knows this distribution and does not expect it to be commented on. Lisa's saxophone is her primary relationship with her own interior life. She plays it when she needs to process something that the people around her cannot receive. She plays it when she is lonely and when she is happy and when she is working something out. The saxophone is not just a hobby. It is the place where Lisa is most fully herself, the space where her intelligence and her emotion and her creativity converge without any of them being held against her. And the show has the school regularly threaten to take it away. Not always through malice, sometimes through budget cuts, sometimes through schedule conflicts, sometimes through a rule that was not designed to target Lisa specifically, but that has the effect of making her music more difficult to maintain. And each time, Lisa fights for it, or it is restored through some combination of luck and advocacy, and the saxophone is there again at the end. But the threat keeps returning. The show keeps making the saxophone vulnerable. And the pattern this creates is the pattern of all the things in public education that are not the core product: the music programs and the art programs and the sports for people who are not good at sports, always at the edge of being cut, always requiring someone to argue for their continued existence, never quite secure. What these programs do, which their defenders always argue and their eliminators always dispute, is produce the parts of education that are not captured by test scores. They produce the version of a child that exists outside the categories the sorting system uses. Lisa at the saxophone is not the Lisa that the standardized test measures. She is a fuller version, a version that the school's official metrics have no instrument for, and the show keeps making her fight for the conditions that allow that version of her to exist. The fight is always won. It is always temporary. The threat always comes back. There is one more dimension of the educational portrait that deserves space. The show depicts, across its run, the specific relationship between education and class aspiration. Springfield is a working-class community. Most of its adult residents have, like Homer, achieved what was available to them within the structure they were born into. And the children of Springfield are being prepared by the institution of the school for approximately the same class position their parents occupy. This is not stated anywhere, but it is the logical conclusion of everything the school is shown to actually do. The curriculum is not designed to produce upward mobility. It is designed to produce functional adults who can occupy the roles that the community's economy requires. The sorting system identifies the children who might be exceptions to this and advances them through a different pipeline: the gifted track, the honors program, the path that leads to college, and then to something else. Lisa is on this path. Bart has been sorted off it. What neither path does, what the school as an institution fundamentally does not do, is question the structure it is preparing children to enter. The economy needs workers at various levels. The school produces workers at various levels. The curriculum does not spend significant time on the question of whether the levels are just, or whether the sorting mechanism is accurate, or whether the children being sorted into the lower tracks have been failed before they arrived at school by conditions the school had no part in creating and has no power to address. The teachers in Springfield know this. They know it in the way that professionals inside systems know the limits of their systems. Mrs. Krabappel knows that Bart's trajectory was largely determined before he sat down in her class. Principal Skinner knows that the school's outcomes are shaped by forces that no principal has authority over. They know this, and they come to work anyway, because coming to work is what they can do, and what they can do is better than nothing, even when what they can do and what is needed are not the same thing. The show honors them for this. It gives them more credit than the comedy format usually requires because the writers, many of whom came through educational institutions that worked for them, had enough proximity to the people who worked in these institutions to understand what the job actually was. Education in Springfield is trying its best with the tools and the resources and the mandate it has been given. The tools and the resources and the mandate are not enough. The test scores continue to be what they are. The sorting continues. And the structure the children are being sorted into continues to look exactly like the structure their parents were sorted into. There is one more economic observation the show makes that is easy to miss because it is distributed across too many episodes to land in any single place. Springfield has a rich man. Springfield has everyone else. And the gap between the rich man and everyone else has not changed across 36 years of episodes. This is formally a feature of the floating timeline. The gap cannot change if the characters cannot change, but it is also, at the level of observation, an accurate statement about the direction that the American economy moved across the period the show was running. The Simpsons began in 1989, at a particular moment in the history of American wealth distribution. It has continued across a period during which that distribution has shifted in ways that would have seemed extreme as predictions in 1989. And because the show's timeline floats, because the characters do not age, because the Springfield of 2025 looks like the Springfield of 1,989 inches, all its fundamental arrangements, the show has inadvertently produced a portrait of a world that is frozen while the real world around it has moved. Homer has the same salary, relative to what things cost, that he always had, except that he does not, because the things around the show have changed even as the show has not. Springfield is a fixed point in a river that has been moving. The economy the show depicts was becoming a historical artifact even as the show was depicting it. And the audience watching the show has watched its own economic circumstances diverge further and further from Homer's. Without Homer noticing, without the show acknowledging it, without anyone on Evergreen Terrace having to grapple with the fact that the arithmetic that worked for Homer in 1989 would not work for Homer now. This is a particular kind of inadvertent honesty. The show did not set out to document the widening gap. It set out to depict a family. The gap widened around the depiction, and the depiction stayed still. Homer still has the house. Homer still has the job. Homer still comes home to the family on the couch. The couch is still there. Everything around the couch has changed. The show keeps not mentioning it. Section 7. Education was being hollowed out. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. And in that time, she has taught herself advanced mathematics, classical music, philosophical ethics, environmental science, comparative religion, political theory, and at least 4 languages. She has published research, led campaigns, won competitions, and produced creative work that would be impressive coming from an adult with a graduate degree. She has done all of this at Springfield Elementary, which is one of the most thoroughly and specifically depicted failures of public education in American popular culture. Let us look at what Springfield Elementary actually is, because the show takes the time to show you. The building is deteriorating. Physical resources are inadequate. The cafeteria serves food that the lunch lady, Doris, prepares with a combination of genuine effort and genuinely limited ingredients. The library has books that are, in several episodes, explicitly outdated by decades. The computer lab, when it is depicted, contains machines that are obsolete. The gym equipment is dangerous. And the staff. Principal Skinner, whether he is Armin Tamzarian or the real Seymour Skinner, is a man trapped by institutional rules in a position where he cannot do what he can clearly see needs to be done. He is not unintelligent. He is not uncaring. He is a person who has internalized a system to the point where operating outside its parameters feels genuinely impossible, even when the parameters are producing obviously bad outcomes. In episode after episode, Skinner identifies a problem, proposes a solution, encounters institutional resistance, and retreats. He is the embodiment of middle management in a failing institution, aware enough to see what is wrong, not empowered enough to fix it, too invested in the institution to leave it. The guidance counselor, doctor, Nick Riviera adjacent characters aside, is Dewey Largo and Edna Krabappel, and a rotating cast of people who are doing their jobs under conditions that make their jobs barely sustainable. Edna Krabappel is the most important of these. Edna teaches Bart's class. She is, in the show's early seasons, presented primarily as an antagonist to Bart's educational experience. She is stern. She is unimpressed. She assigns homework that is not interesting. She is the institutional face that Bart's rebellious energy bounces off. But in later seasons, and in the episode Bart the Lover specifically, the show gives you Edna's interior life. She is lonely. She is frustrated. She has been teaching for years, and the structural conditions of her work have ground down her enthusiasm without destroying her competence. She goes home to an apartment she lives in alone. She sends personal ads. She is a person who chose a profession she presumably believed in and has spent her career in a version of that profession that bears limited resemblance to what she imagined. The show gives you this with extraordinary empathy, and also never lets you forget that Edna is Bart's teacher and that Bart's educational experience is the thing the audience is supposed to be focused on. But the two things are connected. The reason Bart's teacher cannot adequately serve Bart is not, primarily, because of anything about Bart or about Edna specifically. It is because of what the institution does to the people inside it. What any underfunded, overcrowded, administratively constrained institution does to the people inside it, when teachers are not paid adequately, when class sizes are too large for individual attention to be possible, when administrative demands consume time that should go to instruction, when the curriculum is constrained by requirements that have nothing to do with what the students in the room actually need, when the tools are inadequate and the building is falling apart and there is simply not enough of anything. The show depicts all of this at Springfield Elementary. It depicts it as background. It depicts it in throwaway jokes about the inadequate cafeteria and the broken equipment and the outdated textbooks. It depicts it in the shape of Skinner's frustration and Krabappel's resignation, and the specific quality of defeated practicality that characterizes every administrative decision the school makes. And it depicts it in Lisa. Lisa is the most visible case study the show offers for what happens when a genuinely exceptional student is placed in an institution that cannot serve her. The outcome the show tracks across Lisa's years at Springfield Elementary is not a horror story. Lisa survives. Lisa thrives in the ways that someone with her level of ability and drive can thrive despite their circumstances. She finds books. She finds music. She finds adults outside the institution who can give her what the institution cannot. But she has to find them herself. Nobody at Springfield Elementary identifies Lisa as someone who needs specialized support and provides it without her having to advocate for it. Nobody designs an educational experience appropriate to her abilities. Nobody does any of the things that an adequately resourced institution serving a student with her profile would do as a matter of routine. The show is not harsh about this. It does not frame Springfield Elementary as a place where people have failed Lisa through cruelty or negligence. It frames it as a place where people are doing what they can with what they have, and what they have is not enough. And this is the more honest and more damning depiction, because the easy story is about institutions that fail students through malice. The story that is actually most common, and that The Simpsons was describing, is about institutions that fail students through adequate good faith effort applied in conditions of systematic inadequacy. Bart's educational experience is the flip side of Lisa's. Bart is not unintelligent. The show makes this clear at various points. Bart has genuine abilities. He is creative, spatially aware, physically skilled, socially perceptive in ways that the school's assessment mechanisms are not designed to recognize or value. He is also, within the show's established facts, a child who is living with a consistent emotional instability that the school has never adequately addressed. Bart acts out. Bart disrupts. Bart fails tests. Bart is identified by the institution as a problem child, and the institution's response to a problem child is consistent and limited. Punitive measures, detentions, threats of retention and grade, the occasional placement in a special class. The show has shown you repeatedly what Bart does when someone actually sees him rather than seeing his behavior. In the episode Bart Gets an A, Bart works desperately hard to pass a test and succeeds, and the emotional climax of the episode is Bart crying from relief with genuine tears because he has proven something to himself that the school has spent years telling him he could not prove. In the episode Separate Vocations, Bart takes an aptitude test that indicates he would make an excellent police officer. He briefly becomes a disciplinarian at the school, enforcing rules with unexpected effectiveness. The episode is played as comedy, but it is also showing you a version of Bart who is engaged and purposeful when the structure around him aligns with what he is actually good at. What the school provides Bart with is the structure that is easiest to administer, not the structure that is most likely to work for him specifically. And this is not a failure of will on the part of the school's staff. It is a failure of capacity. You cannot individualize instruction when the class sizes are too large. You cannot identify and respond to each child's specific profile when the administrative demands on your time are consuming the hours that work would require. The show tells you all of this. It tells you by showing you the school and letting you watch what the school does to two very different children over many, many episodes. And the audience processed it as setting, as background. As the place where the school episodes happen, there is a geography to Springfield that rewards attention. The town is not described with cartographic precision. It shifts between episodes in ways that are partly budget and partly intentional, reflecting the show's interest in Springfield as a type rather than a place. But certain features are constants. The nuclear plant to the east, the river somewhere below, the dump at the edge of things, the tire fire. It appears in the background of establishing shots. It has been burning for longer than any character can remember. Nobody talks about putting it out. It is simply there, a column of black smoke on the horizon, a feature of the landscape as unremarkable as the water tower or the church steeple. Springfield has integrated this ongoing combustion into its sense of what Springfield is. The tire fire is the show's best single image for the way environmental harm becomes normalized. The Season 7 episode, Mother Simpson, which we touched on briefly in connection with Mona's story, contains a detail that belongs here in the environmental section as much as it belongs in any other. The biological weapons laboratory that Burns operated in 1969 was in Springfield. It was in the same town where the nuclear power plant is. The same town where the three-eyed fish lives. The same town where the tire fire burns. Burns did not simply own a nuclear facility. He owned, in the same community, a facility for producing biological weapons. The show drops this information and moves on. The narrative needs for the episode do not require dwelling on the implications, but the implications are considerable if you let yourself dwell on them. A single wealthy individual, operating in a single mid-sized American town, ran facilities for both nuclear energy production and biological weapons development. Both of these facilities had violations and failures that affected the surrounding community. Both of these facilities were operated in ways that prioritized the owner's interests over the community's safety. And the community, Springfield, continued to function around both of these facilities without any organized response of the kind that the scale of the threat would seem to require. This is not a story about Springfield being unusually passive or unusually damaged. This is a story about what happens in a community where a single powerful actor controls enough of the economic and political infrastructure that the normal responses to threat do not organize. Where calling the authorities means calling people whose funding traces back to the person creating the threat. Where the newspaper covers what is news and what is news is what the powerful decide is worth reporting. The environmental harm in Springfield is not the product of negligence. It is the product of a system that has been organized with considerable care and across considerable time to prevent the accountability that would make the harm stop. The tire fire burns. The river runs strange. The fish have 3 eyes. And the system that produced these things also produces the conditions under which these things are allowed to continue. It does not happen all at once. No one woke up and decided to accept a burning tire fire on the edge of their town. What happened, presumably, was that tires caught fire and the fire was not put out for some reason related to cost or logistics or jurisdiction. And then time passed and the fire was still going, and more time passed and the fire was still going. And at some point, the fire ceased to be an emergency and became a landmark. This is how normalization works. Not through a decision, through duration. The show also places Springfield in relationship to nature in ways that are worth noticing. There are woods outside the town, and the woods are sometimes beautiful in the way that animated landscapes are sometimes beautiful, and characters walk into them and find things that surprise them. But the woods are also where the townspeople dump things they do not want to deal with, and the beauty and the dumping coexist without resolution, which is not a contradiction in the Springfield aesthetic, but a reflection of how human communities actually relate to the natural world around them. They love it and they use it, and those two things are not in practice as compatible as the people doing both would like to believe. The moment in the Season 7 Simpsons movie precursor episode where the lake catches fire is worth reconstructing in its emotional logic, even though the lake fire is a movie moment rather than a series moment. The show builds toward it across seasons. Springfield's relationship to its water is a slow accumulation of wrong things. The river, the lake, the tap water in various episodes that runs at unusual colors or consistencies. The show does not make these moments plot critical. They are ambient. They are part of the texture of living in Springfield. And then, in the film, the lake catches fire, and Springfield has to grapple, in the compressed and heightened logic of a feature film, with what it has done to itself. The dome comes down. The town is sealed inside its own consequences. And the comedy of the situation cannot fully contain the horror of it, which is the film's most interesting quality. The moment where Springfield's environmental chickens come home to roost, and the comedy format is not quite big enough to process what that means. The show, in its best environmental moments across the series, is doing this at smaller scale. Every episode that shows the tire fire, every episode that shows the river, every background gag about the soil quality or the air quality or the general state of the natural world around this very human community. These are accumulating towards something the show can never quite say in the format it occupies. What they are accumulating toward is the recognition that Springfield has been doing this to itself, not through any single decision, not through any single villain, through the sum of all the decisions that prioritize the immediate and the profitable over the sustained and the livable, through all the times when the environmental question was deferred because the economic question was more urgent, through the normalization of the tire fire and the river and the three-eyed fish until these things ceased to be alarms and became landmarks. The show set up the accumulation across 30 years and then, in the film, briefly let itself feel the weight of it. And then the credits rolled, and the next season started, and the tire fire was still burning at the edge of Springfield. The show's geography of Springfield has another environmental layer that is worth making explicit. Springfield is not located on the edge of anything. It is located, in whatever state it happens to be in on a given episode, in the middle of things. It has neighbors, it has a broader region, and the environmental damage that occurs in Springfield does not, within the logic of the show's universe, stay in Springfield. The three-eyed fish swims in a river. Rivers flow. The groundwater beneath the nuclear plant's leaking storage seeps into the water table. Water tables connect to other water tables. The air quality in a town with a smoking reactor and a burning tire fire does not respect city limits. The Simpsons movie makes this explicit when the EPA determines that Springfield's contamination has reached a level that threatens the surrounding region. The dome is the solution to a problem that has already spread beyond Springfield's borders. It is not prevention. It is containment of damage that has already escaped. And the show, across its series run, gestures at this dimension without quite committing to it. The river appears in episodes without anyone asking where it goes. The air above Springfield is depicted in ways that suggest it is doing what air does, moving, spreading, taking with it whatever Springfield has added to it. The environmental harm of Springfield is not a local story. It is a story about where the harm goes when no one is watching, about the downstream communities that receive what the upstream community generates, about the people who live outside the contamination zone but inside the path of what the contamination zone produces. The show does not give us these people. It cannot. They are outside the show's geography, but the logic of the show's environmental portrait requires their existence, and the fact of their existence, the people who bear the cost of what Springfield does to its own environment, is present in the show even in their absence. This is one of the things the show does best. It depicts the visible symptom and allows the careful viewer to trace back to the invisible cause, or forward to the invisible consequence. Blinky is visible. The people drinking the water downstream from where Blinky swims are not in the show, but they are required by the same logic that produced Blinky. The environment of Springfield does not end at Springfield's borders. It never did. There is a Season 8 episode called The Old Man and the Lisa, where Mr. Burns loses his fortune and has to rebuild it from scratch. He turns to Lisa for help because Lisa cares about the environment, and Burns, newly humbled, claims he wants to do things differently this time. Lisa helps him. She develops a recycling program. She teaches him, and then Burns takes the recycling program and converts it into a massive net that drags up everything in the ocean, turning environmental benefit into environmental catastrophe because the mechanism Lisa designed for good could be scaled into extraction. Lisa is horrified. Burns is delighted. He donates money to Lisa's environmental cause as a thank you. The episode is very funny. It is also a story about how the tools of environmental benefit get captured by the systems that created environmental harm and converted into vehicles for continuing that harm at a different scale and with better publicity. Lisa tried to help. The system absorbed her effort and produced something she did not intend. This is not a story about Lisa being naive. She could not have prevented what Burns did with the recycling infrastructure she helped him build, because what Burns did was technically legal and within the structure of the system that Lisa was trying to work within. The system does not prevent this conversion. In some ways, the system is designed to facilitate it. Lisa knows this by the end of the episode. She knows it the way she knows everything, which is completely and without the ability to unknow it and with nowhere useful to put the knowing. She goes back to Springfield Elementary. She picks up her saxophone. The ocean is a little less full. Burns is a little richer. And the recycling trucks, the ones Lisa helped design, are still rolling, just not the way she intended. The environment of Springfield is a system. The system processes whatever enters it in the direction of the people who control the system. Even good inputs, even careful inputs, even the inputs of an 8-year-old environmental activist who is trying with everything she has to do something that lasts. The system processes it. The system continues. The tire fire burns. There is also the question of what the residents of Springfield do with the awareness they cannot quite suppress. Not complete awareness. Not the full understanding of what the plant is doing to the water and the air and the accumulated biology of everyone who has lived in this town for any significant period of time. But the lower register version, the ambient sense that things are not quite right. The slight wrongness that never quite resolves into a specific concern, because the specific concern would require action, and the action would require resources, and the resources are controlled by the person responsible for the wrongness. The residents manage this awareness the way people manage low-grade noise. They learn to not hear it. The brain filters it out. It becomes background. And the things that have become background are the things that persist, because you cannot fight something you cannot hear anymore. Springfield cannot hear the plant. Springfield cannot smell the river. Springfield cannot see the tire fire. These things are present. They have always been present. They have been present long enough to become Springfield. And that is how it was designed to work. Section 8. The environment was already gone. There is a river in Springfield. In the early seasons, it is a river. By the middle seasons, it is established as one of the most contaminated bodies of water in the show's universe. By the Simpsons movie, it is the direct cause of an EPA-level environmental emergency. And across all of that time, the people of Springfield swim in it. They fish in it. They let their children play near it. This is what the show is doing with the river, and with the multiple other environmental contamination events depicted across its run. It is rendering visible, through comedy and absurdism and the specific style of Springfield's visual universe, the way that environmental degradation is normalized in communities where the source of the contamination is also the source of the economy. You do not protest the river if the river is what it is because of the plant, and the plant is where your neighbor works, and the plant is what keeps the town going. You accommodate the river. You tell your children to be careful. You do not look too closely at the color of the water. You develop over time a tolerance for conditions that are not tolerable. The show was describing this process with precision. Let us go back to Blinky, because the three-eyed fish is the show's most iconic environmental image and deserves more than a passing mention. The three-eyed fish is not an isolated mutation. This is the key thing about Blinky that the show establishes, and that is easy to overlook. Blinky is notable enough to make national news because he is visible and specific and dramatic. But the show implies, in the way it structures the episode around him, that Blinky is not the only mutated creature in that river. He is simply the one that was noticed. What Blinky represents is the visible evidence of a larger phenomenon. And the larger phenomenon, the actual ongoing contamination of the waterway, continues after Blinky is caught, after the episode ends, after the gubernatorial campaign concludes with Burns winning. The fish are still there. The water is still what it is. The plant is still operating with its 342 violations. Blinky becomes a mascot. He becomes merchandise. He appears on t-shirts and in fan art and in the cultural iconography of the show. And within the show itself, the moment he becomes famous, he becomes less dangerous. Fame neutralizes him. The mechanism of public attention converts the evidence of contamination into a spectacle, and spectacles do not carry the urgency of facts. The show knew this was going to happen with Blinky. It was happening in real time, in the culture around the show, even as the show aired. Now consider the episode Bart's Dog Gets an F, which is not primarily an environmental episode, but which contains, in its background, a depiction of Springfield's outdoor environment that is telling if you pay attention. The park where Bart walks the dog is not a healthy, natural environment. The trees are sparse, the grass is patchy. There is something slightly wrong with the texture of the outdoor space. It is subtle, and it is consistent throughout the show's visual universe. The natural environment of Springfield is not rendered as lush or abundant. It is rendered as compromised. The sky is frequently the color of something that is not quite right. The outdoor spaces have a quality of mild environmental distress that the show maintains as background without ever calling attention to it directly. This is an aesthetic choice that mirrors an environmental reality. The show's most direct environmental statement, aside from the movie's dome, comes in the episode The Old Man and the Lisa, where Burns, having lost his fortune, attempts to rebuild it through a recycling scheme. The scheme is designed to look environmentally responsible, but is actually designed to maximize profit by converting recycled materials back into packaging products that will require additional recycling. The recycling loop does not improve the environment. It monetizes the appearance of improving the environment. Lisa, who has been helping Burns with what she believes is a genuine environmental initiative, discovers the truth and is devastated. The episode asks her to choose between punishing Burns by refusing to help him and continuing a project that could, in some limited sense, reduce waste even if the motive behind it is not what she thought. The show's resolution does not give Lisa an easy answer. The recycling plant is built. Burns profits. The environment is not meaningfully improved. And Lisa, who started the episode with the belief that she could do genuine good by engaging with the existing economic system, ends it with a much more complicated understanding of what engagement with that system actually produces. The audience watched this and found Burns's scheme clever and Lisa's disillusionment touching, and then went back to recycling their aluminum cans, which is a genuine good and which the show was not arguing against, but which the show was contextualizing within a system that has competing interests in how recycling is structured and whether it is effective and who profits from its appearance. Now let us talk about the rivers and the air more specifically, because the show does something with air quality that is easy to miss. In several episodes, the visual of Springfield from above, or from a perspective that allows the entire town to be seen, includes a persistent smog layer. The town is wrapped in a specific quality of haze that is not fog or weather. It is the visual consequence of the plant's emissions combined with whatever else is being burned or leaked or released in Springfield's industrial geography. The smog is consistent. It is there in establishing shots. It is there in aerial views. It is part of the show's visual grammar for Springfield's outdoor environment. And nobody in Springfield discusses it. Nobody comments on the air quality. Nobody files complaints about the visibility. Nobody appears to have lung problems that are attributed to air quality. Though the general ill health of the population is a theme the show touches on repeatedly in its depictions of Springfield's medical community, the smog is there and it is invisible by social consensus, which is exactly how air pollution actually functions in communities adjacent to industrial facilities. It becomes part of the visual landscape. It becomes normal. People who grow up in it do not notice it as something abnormal because they have no baseline from which to notice it as a departure. It is simply the air. The sky is that color. That is what the outside smells like. The show tells you this without telling you. The smog is in the establishing shots. It is in the background. It is part of what Springfield looks like. And the audience watched Springfield for decades and thought nothing of it, because the show had trained them, through the logic of its own world, to accept what Springfield looks like as simply what Springfield looks like. The question of what Springfield's residents do with their unhappiness is worth asking directly. They do not, for the most part, address it. They metabolize it. They convert it into something that can be lived with, which is not the same thing as something that is resolved. Homer drinks. Not dramatically, not in the after-school special way, but the refrigerator has beer in it, and Homer reaches for it with a frequency that the show treats as ambient rather than significant. Barney Gumble is the show's designated alcoholic, which means the show can use Barney to make points about drinking without ever quite making those points about Homer, even though Homer's relationship to the refrigerator and to Moe's Tavern occupies a significant portion of his leisure life across the entire run of the series. Moe's is the place where the men of Springfield go when they are not managing their households or managing their jobs. And what they do at Moe's is, functionally, the same thing they do at home. They sit, they complain, they allow the passage of time. The tavern is a form of community that requires nothing of its members except their presence and their thirst. There is warmth there. There is genuine affection between Homer and his bar friends. There is also no possibility of growth, no mechanism for change, no way forward that the tavern's amber light illuminates. The show treats Moe's with a genuine fondness that makes it harder to see clearly what it is. It is a beautiful nowhere, a place where the evening can be spent and nothing changes and the morning comes anyway. Bart's behavioral issues, which are the engine of much of the show's early comic energy, are treated within the show's world as discipline problems. He is sent to the principal. He is grounded. He is given the look. The possibility that his behavior is a signal of something rather than simply a behavior is occasionally raised and more frequently dropped. In the Season 3 episode Stark Raving Dad, the show gets close to asking what Bart's acting out might mean, and then the episode pivots to the Michael Jackson material, and the question recedes. The show was made in an era when the vocabulary for children's mental health was less developed and less culturally available. But it was also made by writers who were clearly attentive to the interior lives of their characters, and those writers sometimes seem to know more about what is wrong with Bart than the story they are allowed to tell. The Mona episodes, taken together as a group, constitute the show's most sustained argument about the long reach of institutional power into private life. The argument is not made abstractly. It is made through a specific family, in a specific town, over a specific period of time. Burns drove Mona away. Abe participated in the cover-up. Homer grew up with a gap where his mother should have been, and the gap shaped him in ways that the absence itself prevented him from fully understanding. Because understanding the gap would have required knowing why the gap was there, and knowing why would have meant confronting the person responsible, and the person responsible was Homer's employer. This is the shape of institutional harm at the personal level. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just the slow reorganization of a life around an absence that was imposed from outside that has no name in the family story because naming it would require acknowledging the person who created it. Mona fought. She fought a weapons laboratory owned by a billionaire, and the billionaire had more resources than she did, and the fight ended the way fights between individuals and institutions tend to end, with the individual exiled and the institution continuing. But she had the fight. The show gives her that. It gives her the raid and the antibiotic bomb and the decision to stop and help someone, which was the decision that ended her freedom, but which was also the decision that most clearly expressed who she was. She stopped to help the enemy. She could not stop. That quality, the inability to not stop when someone needed help, is also what drove her to the laboratory in the first place. Burns identified her by her face. Her face, which had done the kind and inexplicable thing of stopping to help. The show knows the tragedy here. It lets you feel it without explaining it. And in the episode where Mona finally dies, it does the thing that the show almost never does. It gets quiet. It lets Homer sit with her. It lets the weight of what was stolen from them both settle into the scene without a joke to deflect it. Homer was 6 years old when she left. He found her when he was an adult. He lost her again the same night. He lost her again, finally, when she died. And across all of those losses, the cause remained the same. A man who owned a plant and held a grudge across decades because a woman had once destroyed something he valued more than the lives of the people living around it. Burns won. The show does not pretend otherwise. But it also does not pretend that winning is the same as being right. The environmental dimension of Mona's story is worth recovering here, because it connects two of the show's most important threads in a way that the show itself never explicitly draws. Mona destroyed a biological weapons laboratory. She did this because she understood, with the clarity that political radicalization sometimes produces, that the presence of such a facility in her town was a harm to the people living around it. She took action against the harm. She was punished for the action. And the harm, the plant that replaced the laboratory, the nuclear facility that her son would grow up to work in, continued. The harm did not end because Mona fought it. The harm transformed. Burns divested from biological weapons and invested in nuclear power. The community continued to absorb the byproducts of his ownership. Mona's sacrifice, which was real and which cost everything, did not produce the outcome it was aimed at. This is the show's most honest environmental statement, buried so deep inside a character backstory that it takes several viewings to fully excavate it. Environmental activism, as the show depicts it through Mona's story, can be genuine and courageous and correct in its analysis and still fail to change the fundamental condition it was responding to. The condition is larger than the activism. The condition is the structure, and the structure is what Burns represents. And Burns survives because the structure survives. And the structure survives because it has resources and time that individuals do not have. The river was still wrong when Mona was fighting. The river was still wrong when she was exiled. The river was still wrong when she came back. The river was still wrong when she died. The river is still wrong now. Homer drives past it every morning on his way to work. He does not remember that his mother tried to fix it. He does not know, in any usable way, that the river's condition and his mother's exile are connected, that both trace back to the same man who signs his paycheck. The show gives you all the pieces. It gives you Mona and the laboratory and Burns and the river and Homer and the job. It arranges them in the same story. And it does not draw the line between them because Homer cannot draw the line, and the audience, watching through Homer's perspective, is invited not to draw the line either. The line is there. The river is still wrong. The tire fire is still burning. And Homer drives past both of them every morning, on his way to work, whistling something, thinking about donuts, ready for another day. Section 9. Mental health was the punchline. There is a facility in Springfield. It is called the New Bedlam Rest Home for the Emotionally Interesting. Or sometimes it is the Springfield Sanitarium. The show has used different names for its psychiatric facility across different episodes, which is itself a kind of joke, but the facility is consistent as a concept. People go there, and the show, in the way it depicts who goes there and why, and what happens to them when they arrive, is doing something that took American culture decades to catch up to. Let us start with the most famous Springfield mental health episode. Stark Raving Dad is the Season 3 premiere. It is the episode in which Homer is committed to a psychiatric facility for wearing a white shirt to work. Within the facility, Homer meets a large white man who claims to be Michael Jackson. The episode is structured around this encounter and around Bart's desperate attempt to write a birthday song for Lisa. The episode is one of the most celebrated in the show's history. The Michael Jackson dimension has generated enormous cultural commentary. The Lisa birthday song is one of the most emotionally effective things the show has ever produced. But the episode begins with Homer being committed to a psychiatric facility for wearing a wrong-colored shirt to work. And then, because the episode's comedy moves quickly through this setup toward the Michael Jackson material, the mechanism of that commitment is processed by most viewers as a plot device rather than as an observation. But it is an observation. Homer is committed because his employer reports aberrant behavior. His employer's grounds for the report are that Homer wore an unusual shirt, which an on-site psychiatrist has apparently flagged as evidence of instability. And the state machinery of psychiatric commitment, activated by this report from the workplace, removes Homer from his home and places him in a facility. The show is describing involuntary psychiatric commitment as a process that can be initiated by an employer for reasons that have nothing to do with mental health. And while the episode is not primarily about this, it is in there, in the setup, in the mechanism. Now consider the episode that is the most direct mental health narrative the show has ever produced. In the episode Stark Raving Dad, the more interesting mental health story is actually about Flanders. In Hurricane Nettie, after a hurricane destroys Ned's house, and the community rebuilds it incompetently, Ned has a complete psychological breakdown. He screams at everyone in town. He says the things he has never been allowed to say. He goes to a psychiatric facility voluntarily, in a state of genuine crisis. And at the facility, the doctor who treats him reveals something about Ned's history that reframes everything the show has ever told you about him. Ned's relentless positivity and religious devotion and patience are not natural. They are the product of a specific psychological intervention applied to him as a child. His beatnik parents, unwilling to discipline him and unable to manage his genuinely difficult behavior, brought him to a psychiatric professional who spent years of intensive behavioral modification creating the Ned Flanders that Springfield knows. The man was remade. What we have been watching as Ned's character, the thing we have been accepting as simply who Ned is a managed behavior pattern installed in a child without his understanding or consent and maintained at what the episode reveals to be significant psychological cost. When Ned breaks, what comes out is not a different person overlaid on the real Ned. What comes out is the person who was there before the modification. The child who was difficult and angry and who needed a different kind of help than the kind he received. The doctor's assessment of Ned's current situation is that the childhood treatment, which suppressed his behavior but did not address the underlying emotional reality, has left him with no tools for processing genuine distress. He has learned to perform wellness without developing the capacity for actual wellness. And when a real catastrophe occurs, the performance has nothing to draw on. This is a description of the limits of a specific approach to mental health treatment, the approach that prioritizes the modification of visible behavior over the exploration of the emotional architecture beneath it. Suppressing the expression of distress does not resolve the distress. It simply hides it until the hiding becomes unsustainable. The show told you this in 1996. The episode ends with Ned leaving the facility somewhat improved and returning to the neighborhood and more or less resuming his previous life. The structural inadequacy of his emotional tools does not get resolved. He is well enough to go home. He is not fundamentally different. The same dynamics that produced the crisis are still in place, and the show does not pretend otherwise. Now consider the episode that addresses Homer's own mental health most directly, where the show approaches something it almost never names directly. In the episode Selma's Choice, Homer gets food poisoning from a novelty-themed sandwich that the show describes with a specificity that is clearly designed to be gross. He spends most of the episode in bed, experiencing symptoms that the show renders in visual comedy. But the bed-bound Homer in this episode, isolated and suffering and out of the normal rhythms of his life, is shown in brief moments of something that the show does not identify as depression, but that functions within the episode as something very close to it. Homer is passive. He is withdrawn. He is not interested in food, which for Homer is the most significant behavioral departure the show can depict. He is watching television with a quality of attention that suggests disconnection rather than engagement. The episode is not about Homer's mental health. It is about Selma. Homer's situation is the B-plot, and the B-plot is played primarily for its gross-out comedy. But the shape of Homer's behavior in that episode is recognizable to anyone who has experienced or witnessed a depressive episode, and the show, by playing it as comedy, is doing something complicated. It is making the behavior visible and safe to laugh at, which makes it easier to recognize. And it is making it funny enough that the audience does not have to sit with the weight of what they are recognizing. This is a pattern across many Homer episodes. The show depicts something that, looked at directly, is fairly clearly a person struggling with something significant, and then wraps it in physical comedy or food-related humor or the specific Homer-shaped chaos that the audience expects, and the audience laughs without necessarily consciously processing what the behavior underneath the comedy was showing them. The same pattern applies to Marge. Marge's anxiety is one of the show's most consistent psychological threads. She worries. She overmanages. She tries to control the elements of her environment that are within her reach, because the elements that are out of her reach, primarily her husband's choices and the town's general state of dysfunction, are genuinely threatening. In Fear of Flying, Marge's anxiety manifests as a phobia that requires treatment. She sees a therapist. The therapy is rendered comedically, as are most professional relationships in the show, but the underlying portrait is of a woman whose emotional history has left her with genuine anxiety that she has been managing around rather than addressing. The therapist in the episode eventually gets close to the source of the anxiety. It involves Marge's father. The episode approaches something genuinely difficult and then, in its resolution, stops short of the full revelation, leaving it implied rather than stated. The show does this repeatedly with Marge's psychology. It approaches the territory and then retreats, not because it cannot handle the territory, but because the territory, if fully entered, would transform the show into something it is not structurally built to be. The audience watched and felt that the show understood something about Marge. They were right. The show did understand something about Marge, and it used that understanding to make her more compelling without ever fully committing to the implications of what it understood. Now consider the broader landscape of Springfield's mental health, because the show populates its town with people who are clearly struggling in ways the show depicts with affection, but rarely addresses directly. Barney Gumble was once, the show establishes, a person with potential. He and Homer were friends in high school. Homer accidentally introduced him to alcohol on the night before Barney's college entrance exam, and Barney, who had been accepted to Harvard, never took the exam and never went to college and has spent every episode of the show being Springfield's most reliable drunk. The show treats Barney's alcoholism as a running joke for most of its run. In the Season 10 episode, Selma's Choice, and in several other episodes where Barney's alcoholism is the focus, the show also treats Barney's situation with something more than comedy. There is an episode where Barney makes a short film that is genuinely moving and acclaimed, and which reveals the emotional interior of a person who has spent decades anesthetizing himself. There is an episode where Barney gets sober, and the show follows what sobriety looks like for him with more care than anyone would expect from a comedy about a cartoon drunk. But the show cannot sustain these moments. Barney must return to the bar because the show's structure requires him there. The comedy demands it. The status quo demands it. And so Barney goes back to drinking. And the audience accepts this because the show has trained them to see Barney as the funny drunk, and the funny drunk goes to the bar. The show was telling you, in every episode that gave you a clear-eyed Barney or a temporarily sober Barney, or a Barney who made a beautiful film, that the drunk in the bar was a choice someone made after something went wrong, and that the thing that went wrong was specific and traceable and not funny. And then it went back to the Barney jokes. The comedy of Ned Flanders is worth unpacking, because it is not the comedy it presents itself as. Ned is funny because he is too good. His goodness is excessive. It overflows the normal boundaries of social religion and becomes something almost aggressive in its purity. He does not just believe, he organizes his entire day around the belief. He does not just attend church. He volunteers, he studies, he applies the teachings to decisions that most people would make on purely practical grounds. And the show, in laughing at this, is laughing at sincerity. At the decision to take something seriously in a context where taking things seriously is slightly embarrassing, Springfield does not reward earnestness. It rewards a kind of knowing detachment, the ability to be adjacent to things without being fully committed to them, to show up at the church and not quite mean it, to say the words and not quite feel them, to perform the practices without being changed by them. Ned is changed by his faith. This is why he is funny. And this is also why, in the show's more considered moments, he is the most tragic figure in Springfield. There is an episode in season 8 where Ned loses Maud in a freak accident, and the show has to grapple with what happens to a man of genuine faith when the faith is tested by genuine loss. And what happens is that Ned holds on. He does not abandon the structure that has organized his life. He grieves inside it. He continues to go to church. He continues to pray. He continues to believe, though the believing is now harder and more deliberate, because the easy version of faith, the one that had never been seriously tested, is no longer available to him. The show finds this moving, and so does the audience. And then it moves on, because the show cannot be about Ned's grief, cannot dwell in the honest spiritual complexity of what loss does to a faith, because that would be a different kind of show. But the episode exists, the honest thing was said, and the audience sat with it for 22 minutes before the next episode's couch gag came on. The show's most sustained theological argument, if it has one, is about the difference between the practice and the belief it is supposed to embody. Springfield practices religion the way Springfield practices democracy, with genuine investment in the ritual and declining investment in the substance. People vote and people go to church, and both activities produce a feeling of having done something without necessarily producing the change that doing something is supposed to create. This is not a hostile observation. The show does not frame it as hypocrisy in the moralistic sense. It frames it as the natural evolution of any practice across enough generations. The thing began as a response to a genuine question. The genuine question faded. The practice remained. And the practice now serves different functions than the functions it was built for. Functions related to community and habit and the structure of the week, and the feeling of doing what your parents did in the building where your parents did it. This is fine. This is, in fact, most of what organized religion is, most of the time, for most of the people in it. And the show does not condemn it. It observes it. What the show finds more interesting than the average parishioner's ambivalent faith is the question of what happens when someone takes the practice seriously, what it costs, what it produces, what it looks like from the outside to be a person who actually means it. Ned Flanders means it, and Ned Flanders is a complicated figure to have around. For the characters in the show and for the audience watching it, he is too much. His sincerity exceeds the social contract. He is asking more of faith than faith, in its normalized suburban form, is expected to deliver. And when his faith is tested, in the episodes that follow Maud's death, what the show shows you is that the sincerity does not make the loss easier. It makes it more honest. Ned cannot retreat into the comfortable numbness of going through the motions, because he has not been going through the motions. He has been in it. He has been present in his faith in a way that means the faith is not available as a buffer when the hard thing arrives. It is available as a companion, which is both more and less than what the comfortable version would have offered. The show understands this difference and honors it, even as it keeps giving Ned lines that are funny because they are too earnest for the moment. The show's relationship to grief is quieter than its relationship to comedy, which means it is easier to miss. But grief runs through the show at low frequency and high duration. The accumulated losses of characters who do not die because animated characters do not age but who carry losses anyway. The things that did not happen. The careers that were not pursued. The children that relationships did not produce. The versions of the self that were tried and abandoned. Homer's brother Herb Powell, played by Danny DeVito in a Season 2 two-parter, is one of the show's most direct engagements with this theme. Herb is what Homer might have been if different decisions had been made at critical junctures. He is wealthy, successful, the head of a company. And then Homer enters his life and, through a cascade of decisions that are very Homer, destroys the company and the wealth and the success. Herb loses everything. And then, in a subsequent episode, Herb recovers. He finds a new idea, invents a baby translator, regains his fortune. But the recovery is not what the story is really about. The story is about what it means to have a version of yourself that went differently, to encounter that version, to recognize in it both the roads you did not take and the reasons you did not take them. Homer and Herb together are a kind of grief portrait. The grief for the alternative life. The recognition that the choices made, and the choices made for you, and the choices made around you, narrowed the possible into the actual, and the actual is not always what you would have chosen if you had known what you were choosing. The show plays this as comedy and as warmth. It does not leave you in the grief. but it visits the grief with enough honesty that the visit registers. Barney Gumble is a different kind of loss portrait. Barney was, in the show's internal mythology, a gifted person, a person of genuine ability and genuine potential. And somewhere in the transition from potential to reality, Barney found alcohol, and the alcohol found Barney, and the relationship became the one around which everything else organized. The show makes Barney funny. The belching, the sentimentality, the way he occupies the stool at Moe's with the permanence of furniture. He is a comic figure. But in the season 10 episode Homer to the Max, and in various moments across the run, the show allows you to see what Barney contains underneath the comedy. A person. A person who knows what he lost and has decided to live in the loss rather than fight to leave it, because fighting would require a kind of sustained effort that the alcohol has made unavailable. The sobriety arc, in which Barney briefly achieves and then returns to drinking, is the show's most honest engagement with recovery and relapse. It does not moralize. It does not punish Barney for relapsing. It shows him relapsing as the thing that happens when a person's primary coping mechanism is removed, and the conditions that created the need for the coping mechanism are not also removed. The grief and the drinking are connected. The show knows this. And it shows you the connection in Barney's face, in the specific quality of his sadness when the comedy pauses for just long enough for you to see it. Section 10. Religion, Faith, and the Comfort of Believing. God talks to Homer Simpson. This is a fact within the show's universe. Not a dream sequence, not a metaphor, not a moment of ambiguous mystical experience. In the season 4 episode Homer the Heretic, Homer has an actual face-to-face conversation with a deity who appears in a form that the show treats as genuinely divine. The conversation is warm and intimate and theologically interesting. God tells Homer that he is one of the few people willing to explore the unorthodox. God tells Homer that the path to salvation is different for everyone. God, in this conversation, does not validate the specific religious structures that the other residents of Springfield invest their lives in. He validates Homer's individual approach to faith, which at the point of the episode involves not going to church and spending Sunday mornings in personal comfort. Ned Flanders, meanwhile, goes to church every week. Ned Flanders prays daily. Ned Flanders reads the Bible. Ned Flanders has built his entire understanding of himself and his world and his purpose on his faith. And the show establishes, across multiple episodes and multiple framings, that God has not spoken to Ned, not once. The man who has given his entire life to religious devotion has not received the direct divine conversation that was given to the man who decided on that particular Sunday morning to stay home and watch football and eat forbidden foods. Now, the show is not making a theological argument here. It is not trying to prove or disprove anything about the nature of God or faith. What the show is doing with its characteristic sideways precision is observing something about the relationship between institutional religion and individual spiritual experience. Ned's faith is performed within an institution. He attends the First Church of Springfield. He follows the rules. He participates in the rituals. He is exactly the kind of worshiper that a religious institution is built to serve and to retain. And the show, by giving Homer the divine conversation and denying it to Ned, is asking a question about whether institutional religious practice and genuine spiritual experience are the same thing or whether they are, in some cases, in tension. This is not an original theological question. It is one of the oldest. But the show asks it in a way that is framed as a Homer gets away with something comedy, which means the audience laughed and accepted the setup without necessarily thinking through what the setup was observing. Now consider the show's treatment of Reverend Lovejoy, who is the institutional face of Springfield's religious life. Lovejoy has been the minister of the First Church of Springfield for the entirety of the show's run. He delivers sermons. He counsels parishioners. He administers the sacraments and manages the building and negotiates the social dynamics of a congregation that includes Ned Flanders, who calls him about every minor spiritual question he encounters, and Homer Simpson, who attends church approximately when Marge makes him. Lovejoy is not a bad person in the show's depiction of him. He is a tired person. He is a person who entered his vocation presumably with a genuine sense of calling and who has spent his professional life in the grinding reality of institutional religious work. The administrative demands, the interpersonal conflicts, The gap between what religion is supposed to offer and what it can actually deliver in the specific circumstances of managing a specific congregation in a specific town. The show's most direct statement about Lovejoy comes through the nature of his relationship with his parishioners. He genuinely wants to help people. But his tools for helping people are the institutional tools of his training and his position, and those tools are not always suited to what the people who come to him actually need. When Ned Flanders calls Lovejoy in crisis, Lovejoy's responses are often inadequate, not because he is uncaring, but because the institutional framework within which he operates has specific answers to specific questions, and life in Springfield regularly produces questions that do not fit those answers. The episode Life on the Fast Lane, where Marge is tempted by a romantic connection outside her marriage, and the episodes dealing with Ned's grief after Maud's death, show Lovejoy trying to apply institutional pastoral care to situations that require something the institution cannot provide. And Lovejoy, who knows his tools are limited, continues to use them because they are what he has. The show is describing what happens when a community relies on a single institution for the full range of what human beings need in terms of meaning, community, moral guidance, and emotional support. The institution is not capable of providing everything. It was not designed to. But if it is the primary provider, the gaps between what it can offer and what people need become the spaces where people suffer. The audience found Lovejoy funny. He is funny. The show made him funny through specific character details that gave him dimension beyond his institutional role. His hobby of model trains, his wife's obsession with gossip, his barely concealed exhaustion with Ned Flanders. But the show was also, through Lovejoy, describing something about the limits of institutional faith that the audience processed as character comedy. Now consider the most religiously charged episode of the show's run. In the Season 4 episode, Homer the Heretic, after Homer decides to skip church and has what the show presents as a genuinely wonderful morning at home, the family church catches fire while Homer is absent. The fire is eventually stopped by Ned Flanders, who uses the presence of Homer's breath on a window to blow back the flames. The episode is structured to ask whether Homer's decision to skip church was blessed or sinful, and God's conversation with Homer refuses to resolve this. God says the answers will be revealed in time. He suggests that there are things Homer might learn from the world's religions. And then the episode ends with Homer deciding to go back to church the next week. Not because he has resolved anything theologically, but because, as he says, church is where all his friends are. The show gives you a theology of community over doctrine, a suggestion that the social function of religious practice, the gathering of people who know each other and care about each other and share experiences together, might be valuable independent of the metaphysical claims the institution makes. And then it surrounds this suggestion with jokes about Homer's breath and Ned's competence and the specific indignity of a church fire in a cartoon town. The audience laughed, and some of them thought about what the episode was actually saying. Most of them did not. The female friendships in Springfield are a separate and under-examined thread. Marge has friends. The show gives them to her in clusters, in episodes where a specific friendship drives a plot, and then those friends recede again into the background of Springfield, where they wait for another episode to call them forward. This is a structural feature of the show's format rather than a commentary on Marge's social life, but it creates an interesting portrait, a woman who has deep capacity for connection but whose primary identity within the show is as a wife and mother first, as a person with her own needs and relationships second. The episode in which Marge starts a book club is a Season 3 episode, and it is worth noting because the book club is one of the few spaces in the show where Marge exists in community with other women without the organizing principle being Homer or the children. They discuss. They are briefly, within the episode, a group of women pursuing something for themselves. And then the episode ends, and the book club does not reappear with any regularity, because the show's engine runs on the family, and the family absorbs Marge's story in ways that make her individual story secondary. Patty and Selma, who live outside the family structure in a way that Marge does not, are interesting precisely because the show can do things with them that it cannot do with Marge. They are allowed to be unpleasant. They are allowed to be bitter. They are allowed to express a version of feminine dissatisfaction that Marge cannot express because Marge's contentment is load-bearing for the family's emotional architecture. Patty is eventually revealed to be gay in a season 16 episode that is tender and funny and that manages the revelation in a way that feels earned. And what the episode does with that revelation is notice that Patty has spent decades in Springfield not being fully herself, not because Springfield is uniquely hostile to her, but because the specific social world she inhabits had no space for the thing she was, and she learned to live in the margins of her own life. This is not played for tragedy. It is played, mostly, as comedy, and then as something warmer, but the underlying observation is present. That Springfield, for all its community and familiarity, is a place where people learn to live around the parts of themselves that do not fit the expected shape. The show's treatment of aging women is worth noting as a separate thread. Patty and Selma are not young women in the show. They are middle-aged women who have lived in Springfield their whole lives, who have had careers at the DMV, who have dated and not married, and built a life that is not the life the culture around them told them to want, and is also not quite the life they would have chosen for themselves. The show uses them primarily as a comic device in relation to Homer. Their hostility to him is consistent and largely deserved, and provides easy comedy. But in the episodes that focus on them specifically, the show offers something more interesting. A portrait of women who are living outside the primary domestic narrative of the show's world, who have not organized their lives around husbands and children, and who are, because of this, slightly mysterious to a show that is fundamentally organized around the family unit. Selma's desire for a child, which drives several episodes including the story of her adoption of a Chinese daughter, is the show engaging with what the childless, middle-aged woman wants and needs in a way that the culture around the show was not very good at engaging with. The desire is taken seriously. The difficulty of the path to it is depicted with more honesty than the comedy format usually requires. The episode where Selma briefly marries Troy McClure is a different kind of story. A story about the specific transaction of marriage as social legitimacy. Troy needs to appear straight. Selma needs to appear marriageable. The arrangement serves both of them in a cold and pragmatic way that is both funny and melancholy in equal measure. The melancholy comes from the recognition that the arrangement exists because the alternatives, for both of them, are worse within the social world they occupy. Troy cannot be honestly gay in Springfield's entertainment industry. Selma cannot easily be an unmarried woman of a certain age without absorbing a particular kind of social judgment. And so they make a deal. And the deal is the shape of their lives for a while. And then the deal ends. The show does not editorialize about this. It presents it as the kind of thing that happens, which is the most honest thing it can do. The women who pass through Springfield in guest roles are also worth noting, because of what they reveal about who the show imagines its stories are for. The female guest appearances in The Simpsons tend to cluster in two categories. The first is the accomplished woman who enters Homer's orbit and disrupts it in some way. She is competent. She is professionally successful. She is, by various metrics, operating at a higher level than Homer, and the episode charts the disruption her presence creates and resolves when she departs, leaving the Simpsons family arrangement intact and Homer with a lesson learned about something. The second category is the woman who affects Lisa, the role model, the mentor, the person who shows Lisa that her qualities, her intelligence, and her integrity, and her willingness to fight for what she believes is true, are real and valuable and capable of producing a life. These episodes are among the show's most emotionally generous. They give Lisa the adult she needs. They give her the confirmation that what she is will eventually produce something, and then they end because the guest leaves and Lisa is back in Springfield with the memory of having been seen. The memory is not nothing. The show takes the memory seriously, but it is also not the ongoing presence that Lisa actually needs, and the show knows this too, which is why the guest always leaves and Lisa always watches them go. This is the specific form of Lisa's loneliness, not the absence of people who understand her, but the temporariness of the people who understand her, in a world organized around a family that loves her and cannot quite reach her. In a town that has no permanent place for what she is, Lisa waits. The show waits with her, and the guest goes home. There is an aspect of Marge's religious life that the show returns to infrequently, but with consistent precision. Marge believes. This is not ironic. This is not the performative participation of a person going through motions. Marge has a faith, quieter than Ned's and less demonstrative. but present in the way she makes decisions and in the way she talks about the world, and in the specific quality of her patience, which is not the patience of a person who has given up, but the patience of a person who trusts that things will be different eventually. The show is careful with this. It does not make Marge's faith the subject of comedy the way it makes Ned's faith the subject of comedy. It treats her belief as one of the load-bearing elements of her character, one of the things that keeps her functioning inside conditions that would otherwise be very difficult to function inside. And the show understands that Marge's faith serves a function that is separate from its truth value. It provides a framework. It provides a story about why endurance is worth the effort. It provides a language for talking about hope that does not require the hope to be demonstrably justified by current circumstances. This is what religious faith has always done for the people who carry it through difficulty. Not make the difficulty disappear. Make the difficulty endurable. Give it a shape that is not simply random affliction. Give it a context in which it can be survived without being destroyed by it. Marge survives a great deal. She survives Homer. She survives the town's instability. She survives the annual cycle of catastrophe and reset that defines life in Springfield. And she survives it with her fundamental orientation toward the world intact, which is a remarkable thing that the show depicts without fully explaining, because explanation would be reductive. Marge believes things will be okay, not because the evidence strongly supports this belief, because the alternative to this belief is not one that Marge has chosen to inhabit. The show respects this. Even as it spends most of its time in the comedy of the particular things going wrong, it respects the baseline from which Marge observes those things going wrong. The baseline is not naivety. It is a decision. And the show understands that some decisions, made early and held consistently, become the person. Marge decided to believe things would be okay. 36 years later, she still believes this. And somehow, through the accumulated weight of every episode, you believe her. There is something that Ned Flanders' situation clarifies about the show's relationship to institutional faith that the comedy usually obscures. Ned's faith is not rewarded by the institutions of that faith. The church does not make Ned's life easier. The prayers do not prevent the deaths. The tithing and the attendance and the sincere application of the teachings do not produce the outcomes that the teachings promise. But Ned keeps going. And the show depicts this not as delusion, but as a choice about how to organize a life in the absence of guarantees. The faith does not promise outcomes. It promises a framework, a way of being in the world that makes the world livable, even when the world is not being cooperative. This distinction between faith as transactional and faith as orientation is one that the show handles with more care than the comedy requires. Because the comedy requires only that Ned be too earnest, too observant, too willing to believe in a system that keeps failing him. The comedy is about the gap between his faith and the outcomes of his faith. But the show also lets you see, if you look, that the gap does not shake Ned, not fundamentally. He grieves. He questions. He has the breakdown in the hurricane episode that reveals the cost of suppressing everything, but the orientation remains. He comes back to it, not because the outcomes improved, but because the alternative, navigating a world with no framework at all, is not available to him. He was built for the framework. The framework is what holds him together. And the show, beneath the comedy, respects this. It respects the decision to need something larger than yourself to make sense of your life, even when that something does not answer, even when God talks to Homer and is silent with Ned. Ned keeps talking anyway. This is either the most tragic thing in Springfield or the most admirable. The show does not decide which. It shows you both. Section 11. Women in Springfield were telling you everything. Marge Simpson is 34 years old. She has been 34 years old for 36 years. She lives in a modest house with a husband who is, depending on which episode you are watching, sweet or reckless or oblivious or genuinely dangerous. She has 3 children. She does not have a consistent career. She is not independently wealthy. She is economically dependent on a man who works at a nuclear power plant and who makes decisions that put the family in financial jeopardy with a regularity that would be devastating if the show did not reset between episodes. And Marge, across 36 years of episodes, tells you everything about the experience of being a woman in that situation, not in speeches or political arguments or explicit articulations of her position. Marge does not do those things. That is Lisa's role. Marge tells you through her patience and through the moments when her patience breaks and through the specific quality of attention she gives to the question of what she is doing with her life, which the show returns to again and again across its run, with a consistency that suggests the writers understood that the question did not have an answer that would stay answered. Let us start with the episode that is the most direct engagement with Marge's interiority. In the Season 1 episode Moaning Lisa, which is very early and which contains some of the most emotionally raw material the show ever produced, Marge watches her daughter suffer. Lisa is depressed. The show does not use that word, because in 1990 children's animated programs did not use that word about children. But Lisa's experience as the episode depicts it is depression, a pervasive sadness without a single identifiable cause, a disconnection from the things that usually give her pleasure, a quality of withdrawal from the world. And Marge, trying to help, makes a mistake. She tells Lisa to smile, to pretend to be happy, to perform wellness for the social comfort of the people around her. The episode does not present this as cruel advice. Marge gives it because she genuinely believes it will help. She believes it because she has used this strategy herself. The show implies, through the way it frames Marge's advice-giving, that Marge has spent a significant portion of her adult life doing exactly what she tells Lisa to do, presenting a composed and positive exterior to manage the social environment around her regardless of what is actually happening inside, and the episode is honest about this. Not in the way that would make Marge a villain or a cautionary tale, but in the way that recognizes her advice as both a genuine attempt to help and a revelation of something about her own experience. When Marge changes her mind, when she drives after Lisa and tells her she can be as sad as she wants to be, that she does not have to perform happiness for anyone, the moment is genuinely moving. And what makes it moving is not just that it is good parenting. It is that the episode has established the cost of the advice Marge is rescinding. The cost is that Marge has paid it herself. The show revisits Marge's interiority most directly in the episode A Streetcar Named Marge, in which Marge joins a local production of a musical version of A Streetcar Named Desire. She is cast as Blanche Dubois, and as Marge prepares for the role, she discovers something. She understands Blanche, not in an academic or intellectual sense. She understands her from the inside, from the specific experience of being a woman who is emotionally dependent on the goodwill of the people around her, who has invested everything in relationships and circumstances that she did not fully choose, who presents grace and composure to the world while carrying an interior experience that is significantly more complicated. The episode is explicit about this. Marge's preparation for the role brings her into contact with the specific shape of her own situation. And Homer, who does not come to her performances and who has spent most of the episode being the thoughtless husband that Blanche's Stanley analog represents, eventually comes to see the show and is moved. The episode does not resolve Marge and Homer's dynamic. It simply illuminates it. And the illumination is this. Marge is playing Blanche Dubois in a community theater production in Springfield, and she is doing it because it is the only available container for something she has been carrying that has no other container. The audience finds this touching and funny. The show was also describing the structure of a marriage in which one partner has fewer outlets for their interior life than the other partner, and the ways that a person finds indirect expression for things they have no direct way to say. Now let us talk about Lisa, because Lisa is the character whose gender experience the show tracks most explicitly and most painfully across its run. Lisa is a genius. This is established in the first season and never seriously challenged. Her intelligence is in a different category from everyone else in her family and most of the people in her school and many of the adults she encounters in Springfield. And what the show tracks, over hundreds of episodes, is what happens to a genius girl in an environment that does not know what to do with her. The school cannot serve her. We have established this. The family loves her but cannot engage with her intellectually. Homer cannot follow her arguments. Bart does not want to. Marge supports her but cannot accompany her into the intellectual territory she inhabits. Maggie watches. And Springfield, more broadly, does not have a space for what Lisa is. The show tracks this across many, many episodes and many different framings. In episodes about Lisa's academic experience, about her relationships with boys who initially seem like intellectual peers and turn out not to be, about her political activism and its reception in the community, about her music and her creative life, The consistent pattern is the same. Lisa is exceptional. Her environment was not designed to accommodate exceptions, and the specific shape of her isolation is gendered. The show makes this explicit in the episode where Lisa temporarily uses a male pen name to publish her work and receives a reception that is different in quality and quantity from what she receives when her work is attributed to a girl. The episode does not pretend this is not happening. It shows it and names it through Lisa's rage and confusion and the conversation with her mother that follows. And then the episode ends, and Lisa goes back to being 8 years old. But the show has told you something. It has told you that the intelligence Lisa possesses, which should be her greatest advantage, is operating within a social context that has a relationship with female intelligence that is not straightforwardly supportive. That the same quality that might receive uncritical celebration in one context receives qualified, complicated, sometimes hostile responses in the context of Springfield. And that Springfield is not anomalous. Springfield is the show's rendering of an average American community. The show was telling you this about the world. Now consider Mona Simpson. Mona appears in only a handful of episodes. She is Homer's mother, who was believed dead and then was discovered to be alive, a fugitive from federal law enforcement because she participated in the destruction of a biological weapons facility owned by Mr. Burns in 1969. Mona is the character the show uses to describe the generation of women who politicized and the specific consequences that followed from that politicization. She was a housewife. She had a husband and a small child. She was living the life that the culture of her era prescribed for women of her position. And then she looked around and decided that the world was wrong in specific and addressable ways and that she was capable of doing something about it. What happened next is what the show tracks with extraordinary care. She did something. The something was against the law, though the law it was against was protecting the operation of a biological weapons facility in a residential area. She was identified. She was pursued. She lost her family, her home, her identity, and 27 years of her son's life. The show does not present Mona as a saint or as a cautionary tale. It presents her as a complicated person who made a choice that had costs she did not fully anticipate, and that she came, in the decades of her exile, to understand as both necessary and devastating. And the conversation she has with Homer, when they reunite, is one of the most honest depictions in the show of the relationship between political conviction and personal sacrifice. The specific conversation between a mother and a son about what it means when a person chooses a principle over a family, and whether that choice can be explained or forgiven, the show does not resolve this. It holds it open, because it is genuinely unresolvable. Both things are true. Mona made a choice that her son needed her not to make, and that the world needed her to make. Both things are true at the same time. And the show, which spent decades being a comedy about a stupid man and his donut, made space for that specific unresolvable truth in a way that very few things in American popular culture have ever done. The audience cried at the Mona episodes, and then next week Homer was back at the plant. And the women of Springfield went on doing what they had always done, which was telling you everything in the margins, in the things they did not say directly, in the choices they made, and the choices that were made for them. There is a subset of Springfield's female characters who exist almost entirely in relationship to disasters, not their own disasters, the disasters of the people around them. These are the women who show up when something has gone wrong to help manage it. They bring food, they coordinate logistics, they make the phone calls, they hold space for the grief, or the confusion, or the chaos, until the crisis passes and the men return to their usual lives, and the women return to the position of waiting for the next crisis. The show depicts these women with warmth, but also with a certain precision about the function they are performing. The function is not glamorous. It does not produce recognition in the way that solving the problem in a dramatic, visible way produces recognition. It produces the specific satisfaction of things not being worse, which is a different and smaller satisfaction, but which is also, when you add it up across all the crises that have been caught before they became catastrophes, an enormous contribution to the functioning of Springfield. Marge performs this function for her family at a level that the show makes almost invisible because it has made it so constant. She catches the falling thing. She manages the escalating thing. She keeps the routine going so that the disruptions remain disruptions rather than becoming the new normal. And the show shows you this, but shows you it in the way that good infrastructure is shown, by the consequences of its absence in the moments when it briefly fails. The episodes where Marge is not okay are the episodes where you can see most clearly what Marge is doing when she is okay. When Marge is sick, the house descends. When Marge is distracted, the children notice. When Marge withdraws, even briefly, the specific quality of stability that the household had evaporates and the family moves through a slightly less functional version of itself until she returns. This is not a story about Marge being indispensable, in a way that is flattering to the people who depend on her. It is a story about the distribution of invisible labor, and what becomes visible only when the person doing it is no longer doing it. The show has always known this about Marge. It has shown it to you in 100 small moments across 36 years. The question the show cannot quite ask directly, because asking it would require a different kind of show, is what Marge could have done with all of that labor if it had been directed somewhere else. The painting, the voice, the intelligence that shows up in the episodes that give her the opportunity to express it, and then recedes when the episode ends and the family returns to its usual arrangements. What Marge could have been in a different arrangement is glimpsed in the episodes that briefly provide one. The show gives you the glimpse and then takes it back, because taking it back is what the format requires and what the story of Marge's life actually looks like. She chose this. She keeps choosing it, and the choosing, across 36 years, is the most complicated thing the show depicts. Not because it is wrong, because it is real. Because people make these choices, and the choices are not simple, and the simplest summaries of those choices are both insufficient for the actual texture of what it looks like to be Marge Simpson on Evergreen Terrace in a town that has been the same for 36 years. The women of Springfield are telling you about this. They are telling you about choice and constraint, and the difference between them, and the way that difference becomes harder to see the longer you live inside it. They have been telling you since 1989. What the women of Springfield know, collectively, that the show never assembles into a single statement is something about the nature of maintenance. The world of Springfield requires constant maintenance. The family requires it, the neighborhood requires it, the school requires it, the marriage requires it. The social fabric, such as it is, requires the daily investment of attention and care and small acts of management that prevent the entropy of close human contact from dissolving into conflict. The women of Springfield, as a group, perform the majority of this maintenance, not because they were assigned to perform it, not because anyone decided it should be this way. Because the expectations of the world they live in, expectations that have been distributed through culture and through family and through the specific social arrangements of a town like Springfield, have made it the path of least resistance for them to be the ones who do it. And they do it, every episode, in the background, in the margins. While the men have adventures and the children cause trouble and the plots unfold, the infrastructure is invisible until it fails. The women who maintain it are invisible until they need something. The show knows this about itself. In its most honest moments, it shows you what happens when the maintenance is not performed, when Marge is not available or is otherwise occupied, and the family reveals how much they have relied on the invisible work by how visibly they collapse without it. And then Marge returns. The maintenance resumes. The family restabilizes, the episode ends. But the show also does something quieter, which is that it shows you, across all those episodes, the accumulation of effort that the maintenance requires. Not in any single dramatic scene, in the texture of every scene where Marge is in the background doing something, while the thing in the foreground is what the plot is about. The women of Springfield have been in the background of the plot for 36 years, doing the work that makes the plot possible. Telling you, in the doing, everything you need to know about how the world the show depicts actually functions. They have been telling you since 1989. The audience laughed at the things in the foreground. The background went on anyway. There is a recurring character in Springfield who represents a kind of female experience the main cast cannot fully access. The older woman who has arranged her life entirely around judgment. Mrs. Lovejoy, the Reverend's wife, is this character. She is not the protagonist of any episode in the way that Marge or Lisa is the protagonist. She is the voice that says, "Won't someone please think of the children from the back of the room?" She is the person who arrives at scandals first and stays latest. She is the woman for whom the social monitoring of the community has become both vocation and recreation. The show could make her simply a villain, a pearl-clutching busybody standing in the way of progress and fun. And it does sometimes do this, but it also does something more interesting, which is to occasionally give you a glimpse of what Mrs. Lovejoy is doing with all that monitoring and why. She has nothing else. The show does not say this harshly, but it implies it in the way that the character has no interior life that is visible outside her relationship to the community's moral temperature. She has arranged her significance entirely around the question of whether other people are behaving correctly, and other people, being people, are rarely behaving correctly, which means Mrs. Lovejoy is rarely without material. This is a portrait of what happens when the available roles for women in a community are narrow enough that the most capable and energetic among them channel their capacity into surveillance and judgment, because surveillance and judgment are available to them in ways that other forms of engagement are not. Mrs. Lovejoy is not the villain. The narrowness is the villain. And the narrowness is not visible as narrowness because it is the water everyone in Springfield swims in. Section 12. The loop was always the point. We have been in Springfield for a long time now. We have been through the plant, and the plant's violations, and the three-eyed fish, and the skeletons in the basement. We have been through Burns's longevity treatments, and his purchase silence, and the architecture of his century-old empire. We have been through Homer's damaged brain and his mother's exile and his father's deal with the devil. We have been through the school and the media and the government and the courts and the church. We have been through all of Springfield. And the thing that connects everything we have seen, the single thread that runs through every section of this conversation, is simple. Nothing changes. The fish has 3 eyes and will always have 3 eyes. Burns is in his office and will always be in his office. Homer drives past the cooling towers every morning and will always drive past the cooling towers every morning. Bart is 10 years old and will always be 10 years old. Lisa is 8 and will always be 8. Marge is patient and will always need to be patient. This is the floating timeline. This is the thing the show built its entire universe around. Characters who do not age. Events that do not accumulate. Consequences that do not stick. A world where catastrophe happens and is forgotten and happens again and is forgotten again, endlessly, in a loop that began in 1989 and has not stopped. And the show has been telling you, from the very beginning, that the loop is not a cartoon convention. The loop is the message. Let us think about what it means for a story to loop. When a character ages and grows and changes, the story implies that change is possible, that choices have consequences, that a person who does something one day is different from the person they were before they did it. That time moves in one direction and brings with it the weight of everything that has already happened. When a character does not age, when the story loops back to the same starting position every episode, what the story implies is different. It implies that change is not possible, that choices can be reset, that a person can do anything one day and wake up the next morning exactly as they were before. That time moves, but does not accumulate. The Simpsons has been making this argument for 36 years. Not about Homer and Bart and Lisa specifically, about us. About the way we relate to the systems and institutions and dynamics that produce our lives. About the way we return to the same conversations and the same frustrations and the same structural problems year after year, and engage with them with genuine energy and genuine emotion, and then watch them remain exactly as they were. The plant is still operating with its violations. The billionaire is still in his office. The river is still the color it is. The school is still underfunded. And we watched the show and laughed at Homer falling into the dumpster and found it cathartic because something in the comedy of a man who cannot change anything acknowledged something we recognized about our own experience of a world that also seems very difficult to change. The loop was not a failure of imagination on the part of the writers. The loop was the most honest thing the show ever told you. Now let us think about what the show does with the future. In the season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, the show flashes forward. Lisa is in her 20s. She is at a university in England. She is engaged to a young Englishman. The future is depicted with specificity, technology, fashion, architecture, the specific ways that the world has changed. And in this future, Homer is still Homer. Older, visibly aged in ways the present-day Homer never is, but still recognizably himself. He and Lisa have a conversation about her wedding that is one of the most emotionally precise things the show has ever produced. Homer is trying. He is wearing a suit. He is on his best behavior. He is attempting to be the father his daughter deserves at this specific moment, and the gap between who he is and who that father would need to be is visible and does not fully close. But what is also visible is the love. The real, inarticulate, consuming love that Homer Simpson has for his daughter, which is not diminished by any of his failures, and which the episode renders with a tenderness that the comedy of the show's regular episodes can only approach from the side. And then the episode ends, and Lisa is 8 years old again. The show showed you the future and then took it away. Not because the future was bad, but because the future requires the passage of time, and the loop does not permit the passage of time. The loop keeps Homer and Lisa together on Evergreen Terrace with the whole of their relationship still ahead of them. It preserves the moment before the future happens. The moment when Lisa is still small enough that Homer can reach her. The moment when Bart is still at home. The moment when Marge is still Marge and everything is still possible. The show told you that it was keeping them frozen because that is what the show needs. And then it told you, in episode after episode, that the thing the show needs is also the thing the audience needs. We need them frozen. We have needed them frozen since 1989. Because letting them age means letting The Simpsons end. And The Simpsons ending is the thing the audience has never been able to accept, not because the show is so good that it cannot be replaced, but because The Simpsons represent something that cannot be replaced. They are the American family as we want it to be. Messy and loud and frequently ridiculous, but together, always finding their way back to the couch at the end of the episode, always recognizable to each other. Always capable of one more beginning. And the show knew this. The show built itself around this knowledge. It made the loop the structure, and the structure the message, and the message the thing you could only feel if you had been watching long enough to know how the loop felt from the inside. Now, let us sit with what the loop means in the context of everything else this video has explored. The plant is still operating because the loop does not permit the plant to close. Burns is still in his office because the loop does not permit Burns to face consequences. Homer is still cognitively impaired because the loop does not permit Homer to remove the crayon and stay smart. Lisa is still fighting the same fights because the loop does not permit her to win them conclusively. Marge is still patient because the loop does not permit her patience to run out. And Springfield is still Springfield because the loop does not permit Springfield to become something different. This is what the show was telling you about the real world, about the specific experience of living inside systems that also loop, that also resist change, that also present the same problems decade after decade with the appearance of motion but without the substance of it. Systems where enormous energy is spent on enormous debates, and the morning after those debates the plant is still operating and the billionaire is still in his office and the river is still the color it is. The show was telling you that the loop is not a cartoon convention. It was telling you that the loop is what it feels like to be alive inside a system that is designed to persist. And the audience, who lives inside exactly those systems, watched The Simpsons every week and found it comforting. And the comfort was real. And the comfort was also the thing the show was describing as the mechanism of the loop's persistence. We tune in because we want the family to be there. And because we want them to be there, we need the loop to continue. And because the loop continues, nothing in Springfield changes. And because nothing in Springfield changes, the show can keep telling us the same things year after year, week after week, and we can keep watching and keep laughing and keep going back to work on Monday. The loop feeds on our desire for the loop to continue. The show knew this about us from the beginning. It built the loop, and then it put The Simpsons inside it, and it put us on the other side of the screen watching them, and it waited. It is still waiting, and we are still watching. Now, here is the last thing. This video has spent a very long time talking about all the ways that The Simpsons told the truth, and the audience laughed it off. And everything in this video is true. Every example is genuine. Every observation the show made about power and money and institutions and media and environment and education and mental health and gender and faith, it made those observations with precision and care and craft, inside jokes, and the audience laughed. But there is one more thing the show told you that this video would be incomplete without. In almost every episode, despite the plant and despite Burns and despite Homer's damaged brain and despite the school and despite the river, the show tells you something else. It tells you that the people inside the loop love each other. That the family, the messy, imperfect, frequently ridiculous family, has a quality of love that is real and that cannot be dissolved by the loop or by the plant or by the billionaire or by any of the systems and structures that the show maps with such care and precision. Homer loves Marge with a depth that the show renders most clearly not in grand gestures but in small ones. In the episode where Homer sacrifices his dream of playing with his favorite band to stay with a sick Marge. In the moment in the float-forward episode where he dances with her in the kitchen. In the way the show, in episode after episode, positions the Simpsons' marriage as something that is genuinely precarious and that is also somehow always there at the end. Marge loves her children in a way the show depicts through the specific, exhausting dailiness of that love, the homework help and the school pickups and the packed lunches and the thousands of small moments of presence that are not dramatic, but that are the actual substance of what it means to be a parent. Homer loves his children badly and completely. He fails them in specific and documentable ways, and loves them in ways that no failure can fully extinguish. And Lisa loves Springfield. This is the most complicated love the show depicts. Lisa loves a town that cannot love her back in the way she needs. She stays. She advocates. She fights. She is frustrated and wounded and worn down, and she keeps going. Because she loves the place and the people, even while she can see clearly what the place and the people are. This is the truth the show has been telling you about love, alongside every other truth it has been telling you. That love does not require the beloved to be worthy of it. That you can love a damaged thing clearly, knowing all the damage, and still stay, still fight, still choose to be present. Homer chose to put the crayon back. Lisa chose to stay in Springfield. Marge chose Homer. All of these are choices made with clear eyes and real love, inside a loop that the show has mapped for 36 years with more honesty than almost anything else in American popular culture. The show told you the truth. It told you the truth about power and money and institutions and systems that are designed to persist regardless of the damage they cause. And it also told you the truth about love, about the specific kind of love that exists inside a damaged place among damaged people who know they are damaged and choose each other anyway. The audience laughed at both truths. And maybe that is okay. Maybe that is actually the most honest response available to the truth that both of these things are real at the same time, that the plant is poisoning the water and Homer loves his family, that Burns is in his office and the Simpsons are on their couch, that the loop persists and the love persists inside it. Maybe laughing is the right response to the vertigo of holding all of that at once. The show never told you it was not. It just kept asking you to notice. And if you are here, if you have been here for all of this, then on some level you noticed. Springfield will be there next week. The cooling towers will be where they always are. Homer will drive past them, spilling his glowing rod, and the credits will roll. And somewhere out there, a fish with 3 eyes will be swimming in a river that nobody is allowed to talk about. And the show will go on. It always goes on. That is the whole point. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield. If any part of this made you think about the show differently, or made you think about anything else differently, that is exactly what was supposed to happen. The show was always talking to you. You just had to be listening. What The Simpsons ultimately is, after all the theories and all the episodes and all the decades of accumulation, is an act of extended attention. Attention to a family. Attention to a town. Attention to the specific texture of what it feels like to live inside the American middle of things, the geographic middle and the economic middle and the middle of history, which is the place where most people are, most of the time, going about their lives inside systems they did not design and cannot easily change. The show paid this kind of attention when attention of this kind was unusual on American television. The format of the sitcom was not designed for it. The sitcom was designed for comfort, for the 30-minute resolution, for the lesson learned and the family intact, and the credits rolling on warmth. And The Simpsons operates within this format, produces all the things the format is designed to produce, and also does something the format was not designed for. It accumulates. Episode by episode, year by year, the accumulation has produced something no individual episode could produce. A portrait of American life at a specific scale and from a specific angle that is more complete and more honest than most of what has been said about it anywhere else. Not because the show is news, not because it is documentary, not because it is sociology, because it is a story told well by people who were paying attention over a period of time long enough that the paying attention produced depth. The depth is there. It has always been there. Under the donut jokes and the couch gags and the chalkboard punishments and the annual treehouse of horror, under the hundreds of celebrity cameos and the running gags and the Springfield landmarks. Under all of it, the depth is there. You are watching a story about a family that has been told the truth about its world and has found ways to go on living in that world anyway. A family that has not been destroyed by what has been done to it, which is remarkable, and has not quite understood what has been done to it, which is also remarkable, and which keeps showing up, every episode, on the couch, together. This is the loop. This is what the loop is for, not to trap them, to hold them. To hold the specific kind of ordinary love that ordinary life contains, which is not the love of people who have solved their problems or escaped their circumstances or understood the full architecture of what has shaped them. It is the love of people who have not done any of those things and who are together anyway. Homer does not know why he is the way he is. Marge does not know what she gave up. Bart does not know what he is capable of. Lisa does not know if it will ever be different. Maggie does not speak. And every Sunday night, or whenever the show happens to air, they find the couch. They sit down. The television comes on. The living room fills with the specific quality of light that comes from a screen in the evening, and the family sits in it together. This is what The Simpsons has been about for 36 years. Not the plant. Not the corruption. Not the conspiracy or the floating timeline or the theories. The couch. The light. The family. Still there. The show will keep going. This is, at this point, close to a geological fact. The Simpsons has outlasted careers, outlasted networks' business models, outlasted cultural moments that seemed permanent when they arrived and that are now historical footnotes. It has continued through the deaths of cast members and the departures of writers and the technological revolutions that changed how television is made and watched. It continues because the machine that produces it is still running, and because the audience that watches it has not yet exhausted its appetite for the couch, and the family, and the town. And the show that continues is not quite the same as the show that began. The writers are different. The sensibility has changed. The specific quality of attention that the golden seasons brought to the hidden life of Springfield is not consistently present in the later seasons the way it was in the early ones. This is true. The fans have debated it for 20 years, and they are right to have debated it. But the show has also accumulated something that no specific era of its writing can provide on its own. It has accumulated time. It has accumulated the weight of everything it has shown you, everything it has said, everything it has pointed at and laughed at, and occasionally sat with in something that was not quite laughter. The accumulation is what you are watching when you watch the show now. Not just the episode in front of you, the 36 years of episodes that preceded it. Each one adding a layer to the portrait of Springfield, and the family, and the world outside the family that the show has been building since December 1989. The portrait is complete enough now that you could spend your whole life studying it and find new things. The completeness is not because the show was designed to be complete. It is because any human endeavor that is sustained for long enough and paid attention to with enough care and intelligence produces, as a side effect, a kind of completeness that was not planned. The Simpsons told the truth. It told it in jokes. It told it in background details. It told it in the shape of characters' lives and the arrangement of a town and the specific mechanics of how power operates when it operates in a place where no one is quite watching closely enough. The audience laughed. The truth was there anyway. It is still there. It will be there after the credits roll tonight and tomorrow and the week after that. Springfield will be there. The couch will be there. And the show that was always telling you something will keep telling it for as long as the machine runs and the family sits down and the light comes on in the living room on Evergreen Terrace and the television flickers to life and another episode begins. That is enough. For now, that is enough. Springfield is waiting. It is always waiting. Patient in the way that only things without clocks can be patient. The couch is there, the television is on, and Homer is about to walk through the door with something caught in his shirt pocket that probably should not be there, and Marge is about to call his name in that specific voice that means she knows exactly what he did and she is going to handle it anyway, and Bart is going to be doing something in the kitchen that he should not be doing, and Lisa is going to be in her room with the saxophone, playing something that is almost but not quite a song she heard somewhere, working something out, and Maggie is watching all of it from the high chair with those enormous eyes, taking it all in, saying nothing. This is Springfield. This is the family. This is what was always worth watching.